Few, isn't it? Are we at 6 o'clock? All right, let's call this meeting to order. Carla, would you mind doing roll call?
Nyla Fry,
Here.
Trisha Brown,
Here.
Sam Kaufman,
Here.
Kristen Rungy,
Here.
Aaron Moran, Joe Zitzelsberger,
Here.
and Robick McPherson.
Here.
All right, next item on the agenda is confirmation of open meeting compliance.
And I can confirm that the draft agenda was published in the Waunakee Tribune on 6/16. The final agenda was posted in all three official posting locations on 6/14 and 6/15. And the final agenda and packet were made available online on 6/14. Just a
Excellent.
couple reminders to the audience to make sure you please sign in with your name, address, and municipality for accurate record keeping. And also those interested in participating in the public comment or public hearing, please make sure you fill out the form and hand it to me prior to the agenda item.
All right, next up is public comment. And do we have any public comments?
We do. We have Tom Foster at 32 Fairview Drive, Waunakee.
My name's Tom Foster and I live at 32 Fairview Drive in Waunakee. I've been a resident of Waunakee for 15 years, so I'm a relative newcomer. And yet I would like to speak to the flag display policy. When you started this discussion about the flag being displayed, especially the pride flag, many just naturally assume that you're against it. Well, the group that I contacted and had the petition signed as a small group, of course, but we are not a group that seeks to deny another group their voice in the community. That was how we were portrayed at the last meeting. I'm a veteran and I believe in free speech. I've supported our country and I believe that people should be allowed to display any flag or item that they, political sign in their private property as they want to. But I don't really think the village flagpole is the proper venue to show support for one cause or another. When any commemorative flag is displayed by the village board, approved to be displayed, what that is that saying that the village itself, through the speech of the village board, that the village approves of that. But I had many people that I talked to didn't like what was being said by the pride flag. I circulated the petition around the village, proposed some changes in the policy guidelines. And the reason I did that was because I looked at the guidelines and I said, these are pretty vague. Now I see tonight that you're going to make some amendments to the flag policy. And I think that supports my contention that that was a very vague policy. I know that some of the things that I had in that petition are common practice through the board. And I was not aware of that. But that again, to me, shows the vagueness of that policy. So when I asked for how many signatures I needed to collect, there was no policy for that either. So maybe you want to address that issue also in the future. I understand that there are people who do not agree with me or the petition. And although I know the petition is dead in the water, I perceive that what has happened is that it at least has generated some discussion. As far as amendments for the policy, during the last meeting, there was discussion about Supreme Court decisions, about what happened in Boston, what happened in San Jose. And our community is really not that big. We're small compared to them. But if you choose to consider these decisions and base your decisions on those policies, there's also a recent decision in Hamtramck, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit, where they decided to have a neutral policy and have no commemorative flags displayed. That is the policy that I would recommend for this board. Thank you.
Thank you for voicing your concerns. Carla, do we have anyone else?
Mary Ellen Kearney at 317 West Main Street, Waunakee.
Hi, I'm here just as a member of St. John's Parish, and there are several people here in the audience who are also representing St. John's. And we want to just say thank you so much for declaring Sunday Monsignor Gun Day, because that's his last day saying Mass after 24 years being here. He was sent here 24 years ago with the express purpose of building a new church. Now, that's a pretty daunting task, but he managed to do it with great finesse, a lot of cooperation with the village, between the village and the parish to allow it to happen. And I personally am so thankful it's built in the older part of town, because I think that has helped to maintain the vitality of the historic district. So thank you very much, the village board and Todd Schmidt, for making this happen. And I understand that Todd is working with Bob Sakshan, the parish council president, to see that that happens on Sunday at our celebration. And I also want to thank Todd and Bill Frederick, because I ran an idea about them, about a surprise for Monsignor Gunn, not even thinking it might be able to happen, but somehow they worked and it is going to happen. And I think everybody in the parish and Monsignor Gunn will be very happy. Thank you very much. I also want you to know how closely entwined the history of Waunakee is and the history of St. John's Church. Waunakee had their sesquicentennial 2 years ago. St. John's is having theirs next year. I am only just so sorry that Monsignor Gunn isn't going to be here to plan that for us, because he does such a tremendous job, and we will certainly miss his wit and his wisdom and his ability to be so positive in his relationships within our parish and within the community. And thank you for recognizing that.
Right. Thank you, Mary Ellen. All right. Carla, other comments?
I have no further forms.
I think Tim might have a comment.
I do. Thank you, Kristen. We just learned very recently that the Village of Waunakee is one of the recipients in the state for the Vibrant Spaces grant program. We were awarded $50,000 for the work that's actually underway right now to expand the plaza area behind the depot. So just wanted to make that announcement. Just learned that.
All right. Congratulations. There's a lot of work that went behind that, and that's very exciting. And I'll make a public comment. Today is Juneteenth. So if you have a chance to celebrate and commemorate in any way, please do today. We are meeting because we are not under a federal holiday, but it is a federal holiday. So many banks and whatnot have had the day off to celebrate today. So celebrate Juneteenth in whatever way you wish tonight. With that, next item is, or do we have any other comments? Do we have anyone online? I almost forgot. All right. All right. With that, seeing no further comments, we'll move to the consent agenda. Does anybody want anything pulled from the consent agenda?
4 and 6, please.
4 and 6. All right. We will pull 4 and 6 from the consent agenda.
I'll move approval of the remainder of the consent agenda.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Call the question. Do we need to discuss this one since we're pulling? No. All in question, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, motion passes. And items 4 and 6, then do we put those under new business, old business, or we do them right now?
We just usually discuss them at this point.
At this point, all right. Still learning the ropes, so forgive me. Item number 4, approve amplified music permit for the Waunakee Chamber of Commerce for Wannaboom. If you're following along in your packet, that's on page 31. And Joe, since you had it pulled, would you like to open up discussion?
Sure. Actually, the comments that I've got are about both of those.
Okay.
And the second one is basically the same thing, but it's for the American Legion Post 360 for Wanafest. So really, I don't have a significant concern here, but after listening to the music from the St. John Festival over the weekend at my home, which is about 1.5 miles from St. John's, it occurred to me again that there may be people, particularly those that are very nearby these festivals, that may or may not be thrilled with listening to that. So what I did was reached out to a handful of people, certainly not a scientific poll by any means, but just to sort of get a feel for, is there a concern about this? Is there a concern about the hours or the volume, any of those sorts of things? I was actually relatively shocked that nobody was concerned about that, including one that actually backs right up to one of these festivals. So given all of that, I think we can move forward with these. But what I do want to say is, just because that was the reaction that I got in my non-scientific poll, does not necessarily mean that there are not people out there that are concerned about the noise at midnight or whatever. And nor does it mean that what I've heard this year is the same thing that we would hear next year or the year after. So I think as a board, as a village, we just need to make sure that we're aware that not everybody is necessarily going to appreciate thumping bass at 12:15 or whatever it might be. So with that, I will make a motion to approve the amplified music permits for Waunafest and Wanaboom in accordance with the recommended motions for those items.
Second. Do we have any further discussion of this motion before we go to question?
I will state that in the past, prior to my time being on the board, I have had people approach me about both festivals. Some people stating I just go, in case of Waunafest, those that are near that one, they tell me that we just go away for the weekend. And then it's kind of been the same for Wanaboom. There's some people have said that they just leave rather than cause an issue. So I too am surprised that you didn't hear any negative feedback, but I'm not saying that this means that we need to make any sort of wholesale change, but there are some people out there that have reached out in the past.
Maybe it's something we need to discuss and be aware of for next year with some advance.
Potentially.
All right. Any other discussion? One more? Yeah.
Just one, being on the other side of the table of having to plan events like this back in my long time, former years ago, it is hard to try to balance keeping, the semblance of neighborhoods in peace with the absolute benefit that it brings to the community, both in terms of bringing other people in and spending their money here, but also even with the current residents of giving them the opportunity to celebrate and enjoy Waunakee, just in general. So I think it is good to be sensitive of it, but I also appreciate the fact that the community tends to really support this.
Thank you. Other comments?
Yes, I'll just say I was a little closer to you than St. John's, and I could barely hear it on my side of Main Street, but that also just depends on traffic and
Oh, yeah.
the wind. I don't know, but they're not perfect. There's obviously pros and cons, but I think the benefit does outweigh. And I think if they were more problematic, we would hear of it. But this is, I think, why they go through this process. So I'm glad. But if people do have problems, come to us during these approvals.
Excellent. All right. Any other comments? All right. Seeing none, we'll move to question. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. Motion passes. Next up, reports. Number 1, Parks and Rec Committee.
Well, I'll keep it fairly short since just about everything that the committee discussed is on our later in the agenda. The only thing that we are not discussing here is the committee decided that we're going to put a fence across the dog park to create a smaller area, about 40% of the dog park for smaller dogs.
It's a small dog owner. I appreciate that. I realize that's a comment. I probably should be making in public comments. All right. Next up, number 2, create Waunakee Committee.
Yeah, we met last week before big summer of events. Art on Main will kick off. And Make Music Day is next week, the 21st. So there'll be music all over the village, it's this week, the 21st, because today's the 19th. Yes, summertime.
They all blend.
They really do. I don't know if you want to talk about.
Yeah, I'll just share that we were initiating some discussion about the evolution of our Create Waunakee committee and that element of the creative economy and a strategy that the board have talked about for quite a few years now as we've grown that brand and that work, and it's gained some momentum. A next transition that could occur to benefit the sustainability of that work is creation of a nonprofit that would initially align with Create Waunakee, but could at some point become the Create Waunakee going forward. So the initial stages, we have another meeting, I think next week, Aaron, with the Create Waunakee committee to continue talking about a nonprofit alignment to start helping that work.
It's exciting news. Exciting news. Plan Commission, Joe.
Sure. There were basically four things, 2 office/warehouse buildings for Badgerland properties were approved after they were previously tabled due to some aesthetic concerns. We had a SIP for Acupanda Acupuncture Salon and Spa that was approved. A couple of lots were combined. That was number 7 in our consent agenda today. And there was an initial consultation for a potential 60-room cobblestone hotel with a restaurant and a few relatively minor issues, but basically the Plan Commission was fairly positive about that. The biggest issue is probably that what we're proposing was 51 feet in height, which is over the 45-foot maximum limit. So, but the developer and the Plan Commission are both very willing to work through that. So that's that.
Excellent. Excellent. Joint Plan Commission. Would that be you, Todd, or Tim?
Sure. At the last Joint Plan Commission, let's see, there was a rezoning request, which actually is going to be coming up on one of the public hearing items. I'll speak to that in just a moment. So there was also a preliminary plat approved for an area, Yahara Estates off of Kennedy Road in the town of Westport.
Excellent. And Robert, you had some EMS that is not on the agenda information?
Yes, outside of what we're going to discuss later, I just wanted to pass along. EMS is continuing to look for part-time staff. This is a countywide problem. This is not a Waunakee problem. They thought that they had a good idea where they could maybe double up with some other EMS districts. And it turns out everybody who works part-time that wants to have multiple part-time jobs already has multiple part-time jobs with those other districts. So they are doing some consideration here. They do need to be fair to the current employees, but there's some consideration of doing what the Dane County Sheriff's Office has done, where they're going to maybe look at being able to offer, I can't remember the correct term for it. I almost said time served, which sounds like they were in jail, but the ability to come in with the experience that they have with other EMS jobs so that it would equate to the same years of experience with the Waunakee EMS district. The problem is they need to make sure that they're not accidentally giving somebody more seniority than somebody who is already a member, because that would be incredibly unfair to existing employees. So it's just one of the many things that they're looking at. And another thing, if you're interested in cybersecurity, since that's been in the news a lot lately, the EMS district has officially moved on all of their servers into the cloud now. So they no longer have physical servers, which is a huge upgrade for them because that's a huge risk to maintain their own physical servers. So I'll be discussing the agreement later in the meeting.
Thank you very much. And then the last one is Waunakee. So Waunakee will be July 4th, of course, in Rip Park. We still have some volunteer spots open if you're interested in volunteering. This will be my first year attending. So I have to say, when I was looking at the schedule and seeing all of the events that were offered for all of the different ages, I'm quite excited to be there. And whether you are 2 or 102, there will be something fun there to do. And it is largely free except for food. So please come down and join us and celebrate the 4th of July with us on Waunakee. All right. Next up, presentations. Discuss and take action on proclamation recognizing Monsignor James Gunn. So page 47 of your packet. And Todd, last time around when we did this, I think I did this a little bit incorrectly. So I make the proclamation and then we move as a board.
Well, I think you did it correctly last time. The a proclamation would require action of the village board to exist as a proclamation of the board. So discussion and action on the proclamation first would be appropriate before reading it.
Before reading it. All right.
And I can, I guess, introduce that at the request of the St. John's Parish Council. They've requested this consideration for Monsignor Gunn. I crafted the proclamation that you see before you myself. But I'll tell you that I don't go to St. John's. I've actually never heard a mass that Monsignor Gunn gave. So my perspective in crafting the proclamation wasn't from one of a member of the church. I attend a different church. But I certainly know the impact Monsignor Gunn has had in the community by virtue of my own engagement in the community. And I reflected a few of those points, let alone his years of service in caring for the community here. I made those points in the proclamation that I drafted for you.
Thank you. And I think the leaders of our anchor institutions, our schools, our churches, our public works, our village, our major businesses, they contribute beyond just their official roles. So I'm very excited personally that we're able to recognize Monsignor James Gunn. Do we have any discussion before we consider adopting the proclamation?
Yeah, we do. I'm interested, particularly from the village attorney, in hearing, I guess, any concerns about church and state, that sort of concept.
Well, I mean, essentially, we have two constitutional amendments, in the same amendment, that deal with this issue that are a little bit on their face in conflict with one another, which has resulted in a lot of Supreme Court case law. One is the free exercise clause. Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. The other is the establishment clause. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So there was a test that lasted for about 51 years before the United States Supreme Court that they would utilize to figure out, well, if a governmental body is acting, is it in violation of either of those clauses? Unfortunately, that test looks like was overturned by the Supreme Court in last year without really a new test. Although I'm gonna read to you the 3 points of the old test, because even though it doesn't apply, I think it's helpful. Essentially, what the courts would do is it was called the Lemon test, and they would look at what's the primary purpose of the assistance or the action. Is it secular or is it religious in nature? The assistance must neither promote nor inhibit religion, which I think is probably actually the key one for us tonight. And then there is no excessive entanglement between church and state. Here, I think that this is what I would say. If you are in favor of the proclamation, that should be in light of all of the impact that has been made by the individual in the community. Don't think about the religious impact, think about the other positive impact, because clearly, just because somebody is affiliated with a religion does not necessarily, I mean, they still can have a great impact on not just their parish or their religious community, but also the municipality itself. To the extent, I mean, so really what I think, as you vote on this, it should be not based on the entity with which the individual is associated. It should be based on the individual and their impact. Because I would tell you that if you were inclined not to vote on this, I think your basis would be, and this would be where I think if that were to occur, we would probably want to establish a policy. There are certain communities who basically say, look, we understand that many people have a positive impact on our community, but the only people that we're going to actually have proclamations for at our governmental body level is for former elected officials or former municipal employees. I mean, that's kind of a bright line rule that some communities establish in part, I think, to avoid making anybody mad, because, you know, we've done a proclamation for one person, but not for another person. So if you were inclined not to vote in favor of the proclamation, I truly believe that that should be the reason. And if we actually had a majority of village board members who did that, we would probably be looking at some form of policy to make that clear moving forward. At the end of the day, I do think that you can vote in favor of this if you want without violating any constitutional provisions. I would just say in part that's because of the way that Todd drafted it, focusing on the impact on the community as opposed to the entity with which the person is affiliated.
Thank you. Other questions or discussion?
In light of that, sorry, Nyla had her hand up. Okay. In light of that, historically, have we been doing proclamations for non-governmental employees and former village board members that would be comparable?
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't have the research in front of me. I can only say that I believe we've recognized an array of different individuals, everyone from Boy Scouts earning their Eagle rank, Girl Scouts, boy, I'm trying to think of some sport, Special Olympics students, sporting students have had major sports accomplishments. So the answer is yes, a wide array of individuals.
I would just like to say that I don't think it would be right to deny somebody recognition because of religion or anything like that, because I don't know Monsignor Gunn. I've never met him, but I know that he's accomplished good things for the community, and he worked hard with the addition and building of the church. And I think he's going to leave an imprint here for many, many years. And to say no to this would be based on the fact that he's part of the Catholic Church would be wrong. And actually, in my mind, it would also, I'd see it as being discriminating because you're doing it on basis of him being a part of a church and not for the work that he has done.
Brian?
Yeah, and to Nyla's point, we can't. I mean, in other words, we cannot reject the proclamation for the reason that you just said. The reason that you could would be we're essentially creating a group which is solely governmental elected officials or former employees. Those are the only ones that we would do a proclamation for. You can do that. We definitely cannot choose not to approve this proclamation because of Mr. Gunn's or Monsignor's Gunn involvement with the church. That's where we would run afoul of the law.
Thank you.
All right, other questions or discussion? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to clarify, I guess not really clarify, just make the additional comments. At the time, Father Gunn was the officiant for my wedding back in 1999. He baptized my daughter in 2004. My daughter attended St. John's from 2009 to 2018. So there's a lot of history there. And certainly the things that he's done, I have a lot of respect for him, and he's done great things for the church as well as great things for our community. And that's all wonderful. At the same time, reading through the proclamation itself, it seems to me that a lot of those items were done ultimately for the benefit of the church and happened to benefit the village. So that's kind of where I still have this conflict within me. As such, I will likely abstain rather than voting no, because no doesn't feel right either.
Yeah, I think it's an important conversation to have and important questions to ask. So for certain, I'm glad that you brought up your concerns and that we talked them out. Do we have any other discussion? Go ahead, Erin.
I would like to move to approve the proclamation of recognition for Monsignor James Gunn.
I will second.
All right. Any further discussion before we move to question? Robert, did you? Nope, we're getting ready to vote. Okay. All right. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstentions?
Abstain.
All right. Motion passes. And now with that, do I read it? Do I read it at the podium? All right, fine here. All right. Okay. Here we go. Proclamation of recognition for Monsignor James Gunn. Whereas Monsignor James Gunn, an active citizen of the community for many years, has faithfully served St. John the Baptist Church in the village of Waunakee community for the last 24 years. And whereas Monsignor James Gunn's contributions to the Waunakee community have been observed well beyond the walls of St. John's Church, including showing great care for the local Spanish-speaking population. And whereas Monsignor James Gunn nurtured the education of thousands of youth in the community by caring for students at St. John's School. And whereas Monsignor James Gunn was often present at community events, including offering a lighthearted blessing of the beer whenever duty called. And whereas notable is Monsignor James Gunn's critical role in overseeing the construction of a new St. John's Church in 2008, which was a key component of neighborhood redevelopment that benefited the immediate area and overall community. And now let it therefore be resolved that the Village Board of the Village of Waunakee extends its sincere and heartfelt appreciation to Monsignor Monsignor James Gunn, and hereby commends him for his dedication and outstanding service to the Waunakee community and wishes him well as he heads to St. Thomas Aquinas and Queen of Peace congregations as a parish priest. And therefore, be it resolved that the Village Board of Waunakee proclaims June 25th, 2023 as Monsignor James Gunn Day in Waunakee, marking the day of his final mass and celebratory reception at St. John's Church. Let this proclamation be entered into and made a part of the permanent record of the Village of Waunakee, and let a suitable copy be presented to Monsignor James Gunn, passed and adopted on this 19th day of June 2023. All right. Thank you.
And I'll add that I'll be attending the celebration that afternoon, this coming Sunday, and we'll read that on behalf of the village board.
Thank you very much, Todd. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. All right, next item up on the agenda, presentation number 2, ADA access audit of playgrounds in transition and the final report. This is page 49 of your packet if you're following along, and I believe we have a presentation from WT Group LLC Accessibility Practice.
Thank you, Madam President, trustees. My name is John McGovern, and this is Shelley Zuniga, and we're going to walk you through a brief presentation regarding the work that we did for Parks and Recreation regarding playgrounds.
What we're going to cover today is just some quick introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about ADA requirements for existing sites, talk about the scope of the project and what our process was, show you some examples of common issues that we saw, talk about what the requirements are for a transition plan, smart practices, and then we'll wrap it up. And if there's any questions, we'll answer those. So I was the team for WT Group. I came out and audited the 27 playgrounds here. I worked with Bill and Sue to get that accomplished. They were great help for telling me where to go and what I was looking for and showing me around. They loved their community. I could tell that in every interaction I had with them. So that was definitely a pleasure.
A little bit about the ADA requirements for existing sites, and we'll narrow this to playgrounds to be specific. And we'll go a little bit into some of the background about the ADA. So the Americans with Disabilities Act became effective 30 plus years ago on January 26th of 1992. It's similar in structure to the 1964 Civil Rights Act and Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, but it differs in one key component, and that's that you need not receive federal funds to be prohibited from discrimination on the basis of disability. So Title II is the portion of the ADA that applies to village programs and services and opportunities as well as facilities. So that's the second bullet point there. So the village is one of the 89,000 plus villages, cities, and counties and states across the country that comply with the ADA. Title III addresses privately owned places of public accommodation like a sandwich shop or the gas station that we stopped at on the way here and so forth. Both are different in the sense of where they draw the line as far as what compliance consists of, but both are similar with the overarching goal of prohibiting discrimination on the basis of disability. Title II, specifically related to playgrounds and parks, prohibits the village from discriminating on the basis of disability here. And discrimination can include overt acts, but it also includes more subtle inaction, like failure to maintain properly a playground surface. So that would be viewed or could be viewed as discrimination on the basis of disability. There are a couple of clear black and white issues. One is in regard to new construction and design. So all new design and construction must completely comply with either the federal requirements or the Wisconsin requirements, whichever is more stringent. So as new parks and playgrounds are considered and commissioned by the village in the future, those certainly must meet the full compliance requirements of the 2010 standards for accessible design. For existing sites, though, it's very different. There was discussion about making all existing sites accessible when the ADA was being debated. That was determined to be too costly and impractical. Instead, the compromise was that all sites will be evaluated. So that's in effect what we did with regard to playgrounds. From a program access perspective, the ADA calls village opportunities programs. So the opportunity to make public comment is a program of the village. So if I were a person who's deaf or hard of hearing and wanted to make public comment, it's incumbent upon the village to facilitate that so that I can do so. So narrow that down to playgrounds, everything from the route to the playground surface itself, to the play components at the playground. Those two have to provide an opportunity for somebody who is vision impaired or uses a mobility device, or a parent who uses a mobility device, to be able to use the opportunity or the program of playgrounds. The third bullet point talks about the lack of a requirement from the Department of Justice. There's no ratio or percentage that you must make accessible within your existing sites. But if you have 27 playgrounds, is making one compliant enough? I think most of us would say no, it's not. Are you required to make all 27 compliant? And the answer there clearly is no, it's not. So we, for decades, have used the approach of one of every three as a minimum starting point. And that's been accepted by the Department of Justice, by federal district courts, including here in Wisconsin, and by state enforcement agencies in other communities. So we know it's an approach that works.
So the scope of the project was to, not to be redundant, but audit all the playgrounds. So we came in, want to go to the next slide?
Oh yeah, you want that?
Yeah, I want that. So we use checklists and we use an app on the phone. We have simple tools, and I walked through every single playground and evaluated it against the existing standards for what looks like an accessible playground. We then offered a community engagement opportunity to share the findings with community members and get some insight from them on what their preferences might be in terms of certain areas, certain playgrounds, things like that, that we could roll into the transition plan. So the transition plan we created takes all the data we collected and lays it out over time. And it's kind of a work plan, so that over time we can achieve that one of three. And certainly over a long period of time, as we're retrofitting or replacing playgrounds, the goal is eventually they will all be accessible, because the old ones will be replaced with new accessible ones. And then bullet 4 is why we're here. We're reporting to you guys on what our findings have been. So, the reason that we do the audits, access is really a function of three things: design, construction, and maintenance. So it can be designed right, but built wrong. It could be designed right and accidentally built correctly. Maybe get some really good guys in construction who said this isn't right, and they correct it on site. The third piece is really important, and it's the one thing that was a part of the civil rights law that isn't usually in a civil rights act, is maintenance. It's not enough just to provide that accessible opportunity. You have to maintain it to be accessible. So in areas like the Midwest, where we're all from, in the winter, you can't plow all the snow into the accessible stalls, because those need to be maintained free and clear. And you've got to make sure that the curb ramps are cleared off and functional. And the routes to your playgrounds need to be maintained firm and stable. So the maintenance is a big part of it. And certainly when you're planning renovations, you need to understand the concepts of accessibility and make sure that that is put into the plans from the beginning, because retrofitting is not the easiest way to go. It's better to get in on the planning part and get the access included in that. And the third one is, a lot of our infrastructure for some of our areas they're older, and they were built before access was really in the minds of the planners. So those we'll take a look at them, but we may say leave it alone until it's fully replaced because it wasn't designed to be accessible to begin with. And we've got some other ones or newer ones that are accessible. And the last bullet point is really the most important. It's the right thing to do. It's everyone in your community should have equal access to the programs that you provide, not just those who are able-bodied.
We would suggest too that don't assume that new construction is always compliant. There's a settlement agreement for an award-winning city in the state south of you, if that helps. Every single new playground that the Department of Justice visited failed. So don't assume that your contractors or your designers know this well. It's really integral to include this as part of your project management approach.
The process, I touched on it already. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've done hundreds and hundreds of playgrounds. So I have the experience. I looked at every aspect that we talked about. So it was Route 2 and then the playground itself, the surface, the elements. The Blue Dag app allowed me to do it quickly. I had, like I said, it's right on my phone. I had a level and I had a tape measure. I was able to work through them quickly. The checklists we developed based off of the standards, and it's make sure that because I've been doing this forever and I might be complacent today that I catch everything. So I do use checklists no matter how many times I do this. And the other piece, and I hope Sue would agree with this, we stand by you. So we're here for questions. If there's you need clarification on any reports or any direction, we're a phone call away or a Zoom call away. So we've already done some report clarification and we'll do more. We're also available for plan review and training and any other types of things you'd like to contract with us. So some of the common issues. So
That's on me.
let me talk. So a route
We've
to
worked
that.
together a long.
We've known each other 40 years. So that playground, and I don't remember exactly if that one met, but the structure itself, the swings, the elements may comply, but what's the biggest issue? It has a grass route to it. Grass and dirt are never going to be considered an accessible surface. So if you're looking for accessibility, you need to have a path to it. Like this is, yes, those are all so similar. I get them mixed up. That's the one by the shelter. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for some sort of a firm and stable path that leads to the play area. But then there's the maintenance issue. Over time, because of our freeze and thaw in the lovely Midwest, the slopes of routes tend to go out of compliance. So needing to kind of keep that in mind, keep that in your checklist as you're reviewing sites and see that the surfaces are staying firm and stable. Sand, this one will stay sand because there's some very specific reasons why this one is sand. Sand is still an interesting play component, and it's not saying sand can't be used, but it can't lead to accessible play components. There has to be some other surfacing in there that allows me to experience the play area. Again, maintenance when there is loose fill, which is a very standard and typical surface being used, whether it's engineered wood fiber or the loose rubber, it needs to be maintained level with the surfaces that it adjoins, because a lip is very difficult for someone to get over when they are traveling through. So this is an example of some ways to do this. We have the port in place rubber that leads to the transfer system. That's the intent is I get out of my wheelchair and I scoot around on the play area. And then there are other elements that aren't in compliant surface, but that's okay as long as there are some that are. You're up.
The transition plan is, as Shelley mentioned, it's a work plan. It's a tool for the staff, but it's also a tool for the public. It promotes transparency about how you're addressing ADA compliance at the sites. And it should address at a minimum 4 specific things. 1, it should identify every barrier at every site. 2, it should propose a solution. And you heard Shelley say that at some sites it might be leave as is. So that might be the way you're going to address that site. At others, it might be to retrofit it or to replace something. 3rd, it's supposed to name the person or position responsible for barrier removal And then fourth, it's supposed to set a time by which barrier removal will occur. We usually recommend that as a phase. Not included within a transition plan requirement, but we know that you have to have it as a cost reference for planning purposes. You can't really put this kind of a plan together without having an idea of what it's going to cost. And we do suggest that the transition plan doesn't exist in a silo, that you intermix it with all of the other plans that the village has. And I mentioned the key issues. I think one of the other areas in the second bullet point that the Department of Justice is quiet on is how long can we take to make this happen? If you called DOJ tomorrow, they would tell you to make the retrofits as soon as is possible. Well, that's just not helpful from a planning perspective. So typically, if we're doing an entire Parks and Recreation system, we'll suggest somewhere between 8 to 10 years. If it is playgrounds only, as is the scope here, it should occur more rapidly. And indeed, staff have a great plan in place to make it happen, to bring to the board. I think the bottom bullet point is really important too. You're doing this voluntarily. That's much, 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 much better than doing this because the Department of Justice comes and knocks on your door. So you're acting the right way here. You're acting in good faith. A little bit about timing and cost. We talked about the effective date. I think the reason why playgrounds and recreation assets are still being talked about today is that they weren't published as a standard until 2010, and they didn't become effective until 2012. So a lot of agencies across the country are just catching up to the fact that these standards do apply. And in our final recommendation, we recommended 7 years at a projected cost of a little over $320,000 for the first 3 phases. And then we do have a smart practice phase and a program access phase, and those totaled another couple $100,000 to bring it to $519,000 basically.
So the phases that we typically lay out, and this is our general recommendations. Sue and I have had multiple discussions. Ultimately, once the plan's in your hands, I don't know what new money may come up. I don't know what public comment may occur at some of your meetings. So it's really a fluid plan. You can make changes and our recommendations at any given time. But basically, phase 1 is typically the things that are easy to do. Unique sites or sites with minor corrections, or work at new sites that isn't compliant. So we recommended phase 1 to be 1 to 2 years at that cost. Phase 2 would be work in areas new to the standards, which is playgrounds. So I think we looked at playgrounds that didn't currently comply, but we're recommending you need to make these compliant to meet your 1 of 3. And threw in there the playground surfaces and components, 2 to 3 years at the 145, 240. And then phase 3 is elements where correction is complex or costly. Oh, that's just one area. There's a typo. There is usually another one, but it relates more to building. So we phase out the 3rd phase to those things where you may need to gain some more capital in order to make those happen. Replacement of full playgrounds typically are going to move a little bit further out because you're going to need to collect some capital to make that happen.
So just a couple of smart practices looking ahead. Act like risk managers, be proactive here, not reactive. And again, we think you're doing that. This is a good example of how to stop this from becoming a problem. Shelley talked about the design, construction, and maintenance issue. Which one do you control? Really, you control all 3 if you want to think about it that way, but certainly maintenance is 100% under your control. Demographics are an important piece here too. It's important to make your playgrounds accessible today for all the reasons that we've talked about. But going forward, it's even more important. Come 2029, there will be more Wisconsin residents over the age of 65 than under the age of 18 for the first time in history. And that's important from an ADA perspective because the incidence of disability for people 65 plus is 42% compared to the general population at 12 to 13%. So that's triple. So there's going to come a point 6, 7 years down the road where you're going to have many, many more people who want this type of access. I think the bottom bullet point is also important. There are a lot of new trends in how people with disabilities are treated, what the delivery methods are. And so that makes it more likely that somebody who might not have been able to use a playground 5 years ago can use it today. So being aware of that from a staff perspective certainly helps. Couple of remarks in conclusion. If 7 years, the average cost is around $46,000. We talked about integrating this with other village plans. That's really important. I think it's also important to acknowledge that staff continues implementation. This isn't a new concept. Staff are well aware of this. And we had great public feedback at the meeting that we had. And we would encourage you to continue to maintain that kind of dialogue with your residents who have disabilities so that you get a sense of what their access preferences and priorities are. And we've enjoyed working with Sue and Bill, even Bill. And we would be happy to answer any questions that you have for us right now.
Thank you very much. What questions do we have?
I don't have a question for you, but I have a question for Sue. How does all of this work into the existing budget?
Perfect. Great question, Nyla. Just to back up one step, one of the reasons, many of the reasons we brought the WT group in several years ago, you might remember the village hired Strand Associates to do accessibility audits of all of our building facilities. So all of our major buildings, library, village hall, village center, also all of the buildings that were throughout the park systems, all of our park shelters. Playgrounds were not a part of that project. So it was very important to bring in experts in the playground field to take a look at it. Also, the timing is perfect because we were just embarking in our 10-year capital plan on the replacement of playgrounds throughout the village. So Tierney Park Playground is actually the oldest playground in the village. It was built 23 years ago. And is slated for replacement next year. Also in our capital budget this year, we have funding set aside for playground improvements. And so as a staff team, we decided it was really the right thing to do is to bring Shelley and John into the village to help us really get our arms around what work needs to be done, because we are right on the cusp of having funding available to take those steps.
Thank you.
Trisha.
Along with that, my question is also for you, Sue, and I apologize if I couldn't be at the Park and Recreation Committee meeting the other night. But so with the funding piece of it, just for clarification, the money you have is for the entire implementation, not to be spread over 7 years, but just to kind of attack it right away?
Well, it's
or-
going to be a many-year project.
Okay,
But we do have funding available in this year's budget to take a really nice first step.
okay, that was the first part. The second, in some of the recommendations of the team, thank you very much for the presentation. ARPA funds were mentioned, and I know later on, one of the items is recommending the use of ARPA funds, but knowing they may be running out, is this something else that we would want to consider supplementing? I guess that would probably be more for Todd. Or Renee.
I guess I didn't hear where ARPA funds were going to be used here in this plan.
It is not our
No.
plan, but it is a possible funding source.
Yeah, it's recommend later in there's another item that's recommending.
Could our
ARPA.
could our ARPA supply of funding
Yeah.
be used for this sort of project?
It could be used. We are running
Okay, that
lowish
was my
on
question.
funds, and 2024 is the final year to use the money. So
Okay.
it's possible maybe some items could be used through ARPA.
Sure.
But we have some limitations on our timing and our funding.
Trustee, we included in our final report too, we have a section regarding
Yes.
possible sources of funding that other jurisdictions have used. And quite a few have used ARPA funds to either pay for the cost of the actual audits or to pay for the cost of retrofit.
And John, that's why I raised a question, only because don't want to not use the money if we could. That's, I guess, the reason for bringing that up.
Other questions?
Sue, could you just explain briefly for the benefit of the board and the community, sort of some of the basic projects that we're looking at doing in year one, like where maybe some of the designated entrances will be, where we want to do the board in place, or Bill?
Yes, I left it on my chair. Right now, our phase one, covered by the capital funds that are provided in our budget, are to attack 4 playgrounds. And in each of those playgrounds, the equipment itself met all of the accessibility requirements, the number of ground level features, the number compared to the number of higher level features, transition plans, all of those pieces, but really needed help with access. And so the McWattie Playground, which is at the library, the Village Center Playground, so the new playground right behind my building, the Village Park Tot Lot right by the main shelter, and then the playground in Meadowbrook Park are all going to have updates to their safety surfacing, where we will be installing poured in place rubber surfacing that not only meets all of the safety guidelines, but also is really top notch for accessibility. And so people that have mobility issues will be able to get to the playground and around the playground to be able to fully participate in those features. So those 4 playgrounds are going to have both access and surfacing improvements. And then 2 playgrounds, one of which Shelley showed in her picture. And one of the things that we knew going into this project that we really like our wooden borders around our playground because it keeps our safety surfacing in and makes it really easy to maintain. But clearly it creates an obstacle for people being able to get into the playground. And so 2 more playgrounds are going to be improved with access to the playground, as well as creating an entrance, an accessible entrance. And that's Augusta Park and Peaceful Valley Park. So those will be the 6 playgrounds that will get attention this year. And then right around the corner, 2024, in the capital budget is Tierney Park is slated for complete replacement. So we'll start from scratch there. And then we're also working, as you know, with local developers for new playgrounds and new parks coming into the village. And so we have always worked closely with them, but now with even a keener eye on both accessibility and inclusion. And that inclusive piece isn't something that John and Shelley really talked about, but we definitely have heard that from our community as well, to make sure that our playgrounds, not only can you get there, but is it an environment that is inviting and inclusive to people of all different needs? And so we'll be really focusing on that as well for all the new playgrounds.
Thank you, Sue. Other questions?
Well, your last point just touched on what was mine, kind of in our new parks or playgrounds, can we not just meet it, but go over to maybe some more innovative styles of play so that it's incredibly welcoming. It's something really personal to me and important to me in my life. And so I'm really glad that we're taking a proactive approach with this. When we go forward, as we're building this, like, should we set the, one of 3, if we have 3 new playgrounds, do we want all of them to be more, I guess, accessible?
Actually,
Is that
what we
something
have
you would need
learned is
from
that
us? Like,
new construction, everything will be accessible. So anything that is new must meet all of the guidelines.
There are some concepts out there of universally accessible, but you can meet it and be called accessible, then you can exceed it and become universally accessible and have sensory. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so used to just talking. The concept of universal accessibility would be kind of above and beyond. This meets it, this would exceed it. And that's kind of where having some of the families that were at the community engagement meeting who have children who use wheelchairs or children with autism, who a sensory area would be very important to them. So getting some of that input in the planning phases is really key.
And then I guess my little question, did this include the tables and benches that are adjacent to the playgrounds, or was that more of the shelter?
Review of that was included in the Strand study,
Okay.
a separate project that we're also working on.
Okay, sounds good. I think that's it, right?
All right, Joe.
First, thanks to Nyla and Tricia, because they covered the majority of of what I was thinking. A couple of things that I've got left. I believe that Meadowbrook Park is getting some additional parking area. Is there some synergy between that and this?
Yes, and that's in fact why that playground stayed on our list, because with the new parking area and paths that were already slated to go in that park, it made perfect sense to tie that into the playgrounds and make that happen.
Excellent. And then the only other question I have, I think Heritage Hills is probably our newest park.
Indeed.
And how does that one, I guess, score on this or?
It scored very well.
Excellent.
Yeah, very well.
Great. Thank you.
All right, Robert.
Go last, don't get to ask any questions. I will say from a budgeting perspective, I'm perfectly happy to hear we could use ARPA funds to cover some of the incidentals. I just would have concerns over the long run of, since this is going to have a sustained cost over time, that we would use caution in thinking that we could use ARPA to pay for the long-term costs. And I'm hoping maybe with the law that hopefully will be signed soon, that we'll have some more funds to use as a village board in general with the shared revenue plan. So maybe that will help as well. I think this is great for the village. So we've had some people talk about ADA compliance across the board for quite some time. I did get to hear the story of the family that actually leaves the village to go to other parks outside of the village. And honestly, if we can keep people within the village, it's not just doing the right thing. It's a good investment in the village and keeping people active here and, shopping at local businesses, for example, if you want to look at it that way. So I think that this is great and glad that we're finally engaged in this process. And as a risk officer in my day job, I can totally appreciate your comments in there. So good job.
All right. Thank you guys for doing the study and for coming out and helping us to do this. I also have a lot of people in my family with accessibility and disability issues. So I'm very excited to see this go forward in our community so that not that all ages do matter, but when children cannot play in their own community with their friends, it's particularly difficult to see that. So I'm very excited to see this move forward. Any other questions? If not, we might be able to entertain a motion.
I move to accept the report.
Pardon?
Was there no?
I'm sorry.
Do you have specific action requested?
There was something in the staff
Yes. Yeah.
report.
Go ahead, Nyla.
I go ahead?
Yep.
Move to accept the report as presented and direct staff to implement the partial transition plan.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right. Any discussion on the question? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, we fooled you there, Todd, didn't we? So, all right. Next item on the agenda, item number 3, presentation from village attorney on open meetings, public records, and other communication issues. If you're following along in your packet, this is on page 72. This is something that when I came aboard, just to frame this, I asked that we do the state groups that I work with, the different committees across the different agencies every year, at least go over protocol and rules, just as a good way of refreshing and reminding. And so typically we do that on a light agenda day, and this seemed like it might be a light agenda day. But we surprised ourselves. So Brian.
Sure. So this starts on page 72 of your packet. Yeah, we're not here because we've done anything wrong. Just to make that clear. I mean, I feel very comfortable with what the village does from an open meeting standpoint and noticing, and as complicated as the public records law has become, as far as, Carl and I talk relatively frequently on that. And so I think we're doing what we need to do. Just a couple of acknowledgements for purposes of the materials in your packet. As you will see, one of the things that's in the packet is an article written by the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. That is a great resource if you're ever looking for information on open meetings or public records law. Also in the packet, there are references to the guidelines issued by the Wisconsin Department of Justice for both open meetings and public records law. They are fantastic. And then just to Matt Dregney, who's a partner in my firm with me, he was kind enough to allow me to utilize some materials that he had put together that I tweaked a little bit. Because you're not the only community that's doing this. Other communities also have, what I would call quasi updates of these different laws. The other thing to keep in mind is, I can't recall how many pages this is, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you go to the guide for the open meetings law that the Department of Justice has published, it's 49 pages. The guide for the public records law that the DOJ has published is 96 pages. And I think we have about 10 here. So this is obviously not intended to deal with everything, just to give a broad overview and, more importantly, to answer whatever questions that you have, as opposed to me just reading off the outline. Really, when you get to the open meetings outline, it's there intended to, I would say, just kind of give some foundational information. So that talks about what does the law require. I mean, obviously, there's some easy tips. Essentially, whenever we have a governmental meeting, we follow the open meetings law. You can get into some gray areas, not for obviously the village board or village committees, but other entities when you get to what is a governmental body. Usually, if we get to that point, that's when the attorney gets called. But it's a pretty simple process to just assume that if it's related to the governmental action for Waunakee, it's going to require an open meeting. We're going to have to satisfy the open meeting requirements. Then you start to get into what is a meeting, and then there's a lot of information that really gets into that issue. I mean, obviously, we're having a meeting now. This is very simple. If you have a situation where you have 4 or more village board members that are in the same room together, there's a presumed open meeting. It's a presumption that can be overcome. In fact, if we're not discussing governmental business, but to the extent that 4 of you would be together, we would start from that assumption. There's a 2-part test that you look at, and that's in the materials itself. Are we gathering, the first one deals with, the first portion of the test is there is a gathering for the purpose of deciding information regarding governmental business. That's kind of more of a subjective test. The second part of the test relates to the number of people that are present. That's more objective. Again, we usually don't get into that. I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever been asked to look at this issue in the village, because it's usually pretty bright line rule as to, are we having a meeting or aren't we? The next part, though, is kind of where we get into, starting with the walking quorum at the bottom of this page, and then getting into the other issues. This is where you start to get, I would say, kind of more a little bit confusion. The easy rule for village board members, and this would also apply for committee members, is, if you're going to talk about governmental business, just do it in an open meeting. I mean, if you follow that rule, and that's with your other elected officials, I'm not talking about constituents. You obviously can talk governmental business with constituents, get information with them, share information with them. When I talk about, talking about outside the scope of a meeting, I mean with your other board members, other committee members. We have had situations where we have essentially established staff level committees with 2 board members. I distinctly remember doing that when we were working on the ICE facility. So that is generally allowed, but as soon as you get past 2 members, then you start to get into the different issues that are identified in the outline, and then also in like the Department of Justice materials and the league materials. Walking quorum, I guess that's, if you remember the game that you play, maybe I'm dating myself here, but play the game in kindergarten of telephone. And so the whole purpose of the game was you start on one end and you see how different the story is that you get to the other end. Well, here it's more of a scenario of you start having a discussion with one board member, and then that board member shares the information with another board member, and then so on and so forth. And eventually you've gotten to the point where maybe a little too much information has been shared by board members on a particular issue outside the scope of a meeting. And so that, I go back to, if you're only talking about governmental business with constituents and not with your fellow elected officials outside the scope of a meeting, you're going to be fine. You have nothing to worry about. it's not necessarily, it's somewhere in the outline and then also in the materials, this concept of a negative quorum. So don't just think about essentially how many votes does it take to potentially get something passed. It's also theoretically the number of votes it would take to block something. And, we can have a meeting of 4 people that constitutes a quorum because it's a majority of the village board. So theoretically, you could have, if 2 people get together, the key is if like, let's say there's a meeting that's coming up in 2 weeks and we know that there's only going to be 4 board members that are going to be present, then you can't even talk to anybody about what's going to come up because 2 people theoretically could block that action. What's unique about that though is for someone to really establish that you violated the law and there was a negative quorum, you would need to have knowledge that there would only be 4 people at that meeting. We usually assume that there's 7. That's why when you look within your materials, even on page 3, this deals more with emails, but this is right from the Department of Justice guidelines. It says, although 2 members of a governmental body larger than 4 members may generally discuss the body's business, and then it goes on. So it's right within the DOJ's materials that 2 people talking typically will not violate the law. Again, though, sometimes, if there's only going to be 4 at a meeting and people know that, that's where you don't even want to have a discussion among 2. The watering hole meeting concept is you choose, I would compare that with, on the next page, page 3, there's this concept of a social or chance gathering. Watering hole is, okay, we know that everybody's going to go to the bar after the meeting and we're going there for the specific intent of meeting with each other and talking about it. Versus a social gathering or a chance gathering is just, we all happen to be there. As long as no governmental business is discussed, you're fine. But I know that there are, and maybe in the past, not for Waunakee necessarily, but other areas. I worked in northern part of the state for a period of time and a little bit more of a concern there, where as soon as the meeting ended, people would literally go right to the bar and the attorneys would basically just walk in the other direction because it's like, we don't even want to know what's going on over there. If you're not talking about governmental business, you have no problem. But if somebody sees 4 people leave a meeting, go someplace together, there's going to be a little bit of an assumption that you are doing that. So again, let's try to avoid that scenario as compared to whether it's Waunafest or Wannaboom or the different festivals that all communities that's in Dane County have. There's probably going to be a period of time where all village board members are at Waunafest or are at Wannaboom, and you still get to talk to each other. You don't have to avoid each other. That's more of a chance gathering. I would still suggest let's not talk any governmental business, in part to save you. If a constituent sees 2 of you talking there, they may come over with the specific idea of, I want to talk governmental business with you. And that's a situation you want to avoid. And I'm guessing when you go to a festival, you don't want to talk shop. You want to talk about things that have nothing to do with the operation of the village. The community organization meeting, that's one thing that we actually do address. So I believe that, for example, for every plan commission meeting, there is a note at the bottom of the agenda for the plan commission that says we may have a quorum of village board members that attend, because that happens to be the particular committee, whether it's in Waunakee or other communities, where you do have a lot of the elected officials want to come and watch what's going on. And so we specifically deal with the issue and inform the public that while other village board members are not going to be participating, they're going to be sitting in the audience. If you were to show up at that meeting, you would potentially see a quorum of village board members. You can also see this occur. I do believe that we've addressed this at our listening sessions. I think in the past, Chris, as village president, held listening sessions, and I do believe those were noticed. And when they were, I think that we had some language at the bottom that said that there may be a quorum of the village board attending those. Again, it's more just to let the public know nothing nefarious is going on. Yes, we understand there may be a quorum of village board members, but this particular meeting is not intended to, it's not intended to be a village board meeting, because we're not going to discuss governmental business. We have now, it's so easy to communicate, whether it's emails, and I mean, without getting into the scope of and talking about anything that I tell you all, everyone knows that if I send an email to village board members, one of the things at the top of the email says, do not reply all. And whether that comes from the attorney or from staff, it is okay for information to be shared, you know, as a group email with village board members, but we want to make sure that there's no other communications that are occurring between the elected officials. And so if you look at the changes that have been made to the Department of Justice guidelines over the years, you will see a lot more information in the guide regarding emails, because especially if you are the author, you draft the initial email, you don't necessarily control what's going to happen with that email when it moves after it leaves your email address. And so again, be very careful with emails. You can violate the open meetings law through an email string, which is, again, you know, if you go back to the kind of the cardinal rule, if you're going to talk about governmental business with your other elected officials, only do it at a noticed meeting, then you have no problem at all. You're never going to have a violation. I'm kind of talking kind of fast, moving through this. So I want to make sure I'm willing to answer whatever questions you might have as we go through. And I don't want to read verbatim, you know, what's in the outline.
Do you have any questions so far? No. But two people can talk about an upcoming committee meeting. Yes.
Two people can. Again, that's the situation. And we've done that before. It seems to be, you know, I wrestle with it again because of the negative quorum issue. But as I've looked into it further, as long as we don't have a belief among the two elected officials or the two committee members that in fact we are going to have a meeting shortly we would constitute a negative quorum. That's where I would say, yes, you can, with the caveat of understand the context of what the discussion is about. Because if it turns out that you're talking about an issue that's going to be on a board agenda and you know that there are only going to be 4 members at that particular next board meeting, that's where you can get potentially in trouble with 2. But the general rule is that 2 can talk. So, I mean, but again, I go back to if you only discuss governmental business with your fellow board members at an open session meeting, then there's no chance of any type of violation. And that goes for, you know, plan commission members who, you know, have are a 7-member body.
All right, thanks.
For what it's worth, I was having trouble kind of following you I don't think it's effective.
Oh, okay.
Throw that
That's
up on
fine.
the screen.
Okay.
What I will share though, for those who are watching the recording or in the room, the entire packet that's outlined that Attorney Kleinmeyer is going through is in the packet that's available online for viewing.
So those, I guess, are just kind of some general rules regarding, you know, what is a meeting. And I guess if anything, take away anything from this, it's be very careful with emails. That seems to be the area where people get a little bit, you know, a little bit of a concern about forwarding and replying all and things of that nature, because it doesn't take a lot. And all of a sudden you've had, let's say, 4 elected officials comment on a particular topic that could come before the body. That's a problem.
And I'd say that's why you see staff using the practice more often now for both board as well as committees of using blind copy for all members of that body. You might see staff listed in CC, but then all the members of the body in the blind copy section.
Yeah, because I mean, there are times when staff has to provide information and you're going to do it in that fashion as opposed to writing 7 separate emails. The next section of the outline just deals with what is adequate notice. I wasn't going to get into a lot of detail on that. There was a rule that was applied, then that rule got changed by courts. I feel very comfortable that all of the notices that Carlo puts together for the board and that Tracy puts together for the plan commission, and I'm sure for all of the meetings, we are definitely providing adequate notice. We always try, to the extent that we can, for example, if there's a development, we always try to identify as clearly as we can where the land is that's going to be associated with the developments. I'm not aware of the village ever having an issue with someone reasonably claiming that we don't have adequate notice. I will note that kind of the change in the law and the test is now, it's within the league article, starting on page 83 of your packet, which is 248 of that league article. It gets into, what happened with the change in the law on how courts look at whether or not the notice is adequate. I think closed session, we do have some closed sessions. Usually it's only at the village board level or potentially at like a personnel committee meeting when you get into employee personnel issues. I feel very comfortable that how the village has approached closed sessions is within the bounds of the law. And the vast majority of the time, I think I'm actually here. So, and I know that you follow the processes where you have the roll call vote and it's being identified. I think one of the things that the biggest question that sometimes people have with respect to a closed session is when, if action is taken, when should you take it in closed session versus when should you come into open session and take it? And that's where essentially, as an example would be if you've gone into closed session for bargaining purposes, and then let's say you take action in closed session that relates to terms and conditions, but some flexibility is given to municipal staff, which is typically the case. Hey, we'd love to be able to get X, but we're willing to live with Y. That's definitely an action that would need to be taken in closed session, because if you come in open session, you've effectively defeated the entire purpose for going into closed session in the first place, because you're going to let that other party know, essentially where the ultimate decision-making body, which is the village board, stands. When it comes to, so again, at the end of the section regarding open meetings, that I have a link in there to the page for the Department of Justice that takes you to the guide. Again, I use it just about whenever I have a question on open meetings law, I will at least refer to the guide in some way, shape, or form. It's very well, it's very thorough. And it's just got a lot of great information. I also utilize the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. Open meetings, public records. I've been practicing for 23 years now. And the first presentation I ever gave when I was working up in Wausau was on open meetings and public records. The difference then is I literally would just read from the outline, whereas now the experience allows me to talk about it a little bit more than just regurgitate what the law is. So I guess I was going to move on to the public records, but I thought maybe if there's any questions about open meetings, maybe field them now.
I did have a question. Social media, is it more like email? Is it more like a social gathering? Where does social media fall in all of these?
Well, that's actually, I was going to get to that at the end, if
Okay.
that works. That's
Yep,
the third
fine.
section of the.
All right.
It's a little bit of both, though, I would say, because I would just as a preview, there's maintenance issues related, like record maintenance issues related to social media. And then there's concerns that you need to have related to multiple comments, let's say from board members, that all of a sudden now you've got 4 people who've commented on a particular issue, and that gets to be problematic. So it impacts both areas. So public records law, I think some of the stuff for the board to think about, and this occurred, I don't have it in the code, or in the outline, but I just wanted to comment on it. So we have a section of our code that talks about legal custodians. Because essentially, if you have a public record, then there's a custodian for that public record. And I would say for you all, to the extent that you don't have to be the custodian, I would view that as a benefit. And what I mean by that is, so here it says, custodians of elected officials and the records of such office are determined by the statutes. So you as elected officials have to maintain your own records, except to the extent that we're able to have a village employee do it. And then when you look at section 2-409 of the village code, subsection B, it says the village clerk shall act as legal custodian for the village board and all village records. So to the extent that the village clerk has access to the records that you have, then you don't need to worry about maintaining them anymore. So you've heard me say this countless times in the context of litigation, but it's also in the context of public records. Use your village email account for all of your governmental business, and don't use your personal email account. And as long as you do that, then staff has access to all of the emails that are coming to the village email account, whether it's staff's emails or your emails. You don't have to worry about maintaining any of those records because the staff is doing it for you. You don't have to worry about responding to any public records request because staff is able to search our emails and do that. To the extent that you get an email, let's say somebody emails your personal email account because they just happen to have it and they want a response from you. One of the ways that you can kind of do that and then not have to worry about maintenance is if you respond to them, make sure that you copy maybe Carla or somebody else if it's a more appropriate, different village staff employee, but then copy your email account. So that way, now when the answer has been sent to the constituents, not the first email and your answer are now on the village email account system, which means that you don't have to worry about maintaining that record anymore. That's something that the village can maintain. If you get a letter in the mail, let's say you want to keep the letter, but if you also provide a copy to village staff, then you don't have to worry about maintaining that anymore because you have handled that, and that complies with the language of the code that I read that said the village clerk shall act as custodian for the village board. If you don't have to worry about maintenance issues, and you don't have to worry about responding to public records requests because this building has everything, that makes your lives much easier. And it's, I've talked about that in the past in regard to discovery and litigation. It's the same concept. One of the things that you want to avoid, that I would want to avoid if I were in your shoes, is if there's a public records request, or more to the point, if there's litigation, I don't want anyone to get access to my personal computer. If you can legitimately say, I never do governmental business from my personal email accounts, it's only from my Village of Waunakee governmental account, then they're not going to be able to get access to your computer because we're going to have everything on our server here. Now there is the caveat, and then you start getting into issues. Well, what happens if I'm using my governmental accounts, but somebody sends me something that's personal, so it's not governmental related? Essentially, the analysis that we do then is whenever we get a public records request, the first job is to gather all of the records that fall within the scope of the request. And then we say, okay, here, these records fall within the scope and clearly are records. Here are records that fall within the scope, but we don't believe constitute public records. If it's purely personal, those would go in the second batch because they don't relate to governmental business. So there's not a downside in, if every once in a while you receive something that, or you personal on your village account, because we wouldn't need to provide that as part of a response to a records request or in response to discovery. I know I just kind of ran through a bunch of stuff there, and a lot of it's, gets covered in what's a record, what's an authority, custodian of records. But again, for me, if essentially every governmental record that you have as an elected official is also in this building, whether it's an email or you've provided it to Carla, then you don't have to worry about being the custodian, and staff can just worry about being the custodian of the records. The other thing that I would say, and one of the reasons why there's less information on the public records law than, let's say, on the open meetings law, is when you get to the next, or the subsection E, the public records law has become very, very complicated. I would say that the first 10 years that I was doing work, even though I was, as a municipal attorney, was still, obviously helped with public record requests, it was rare that we would get called as attorneys. Now, I would say among the different municipalities that I represent, I'm dealing with probably at least 6 questions a month. The electronic aspect of this has become very difficult. Notification issues have been difficult. Now, that's not really something that you need to worry about, but I just want to bring it up from the standpoint of it's become more costly for municipalities to deal with public records requests. It's a fact of life. Some of the larger municipalities in the state, I've been told, have their own essentially public records departments that deal with responses. I believe that the Department of Administration has essentially certain employees who are designated solely for responding to different public records requests. So it has become very complicated, but as an elected official, you have essentially have the ability to take yourself out of that complication if you make sure that all governmental records that you've received or sent are housed, whether hard copy or electronically with village staff, and then it becomes a staff issue and not a elected official issue.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, on page 77, under what are the custodian's duties? Number 2, retain records for the time required by the law. The general rule is 7 years. I love history. So what happens to the history of the village?
Well, I don't know how long we maintain records. I just know under the public records law, that you have to retain it for 7 years. I don't want to get too far over my skis on this, but I do believe that I know that sometimes historical societies get involved if you look at destroying records, because they may want to see them before they're destroyed to determine whether or not they have historical value or not. But whether or not Waunakee retains records that go back further than 7 years and what they do with them, I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, did someone have the answer?
I can speak a little bit to that. The village has adopted the state record retention policy, which was put together by the State Historical Society. So there are certain records that if we're gonna, that are not in our scope to keep for a long period of time, we do notify the Historical Society. They go through those records and determine if they want to keep them or not, if there's something that they want to house. So we have to get permission from them before we can destroy them.
Okay, thank you.
Several other questions
Okay.
around that. One of the first ones was you talked about replying and copying the village. Would it be equally as valid to forward that message into your village account and then continue that communication from there?
Sure. I guess my point was just to make sure that even if you receive an email to your personal account, there are ways that essentially, so let's say it's an email that you receive that you're not going to respond to because it doesn't call for a response. Yes, forwarding the email to your personal account and probably copying a relevant, I guess part of this then depends on communication with village staff. I mean, is it an email where it may be appropriate? It's a streets issue. So is it something that you want to make Bill, aware of? Then by essentially taking that initial email and just forwarding it, now it is on our server here and you don't have to worry about maintaining it. So yeah, forwarding is something that you could do. The example I gave was simply to demonstrate a way that you can take something that was sent to your personal account and get it onto our server such that you don't need to worry about maintaining the record.
Okay. Second question is definitely one of a technical nature. Given Office 365 and how all of that stuff flows through there, are all of our emails being archived at this point? So as we go through and do whatever, in Outlook, if we delete, are they still held there or should we be specifically archiving, which is what I've been doing?
So the way that Microsoft Office and 365 work is that after you delete an email, they go into your deleted folder for, I believe, 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
After that happens, they are automatically removed from that folder. However, they are stored in another capacity for, I think, another 30 to 60 days after that, and sort of like a hidden deleted folder that really, I don't think anyone here has the capability other than our IT service provider has the ability to go in and get them. After that point, those records are gone. So after they're purged from the deleted folder, they are then gone for good.
So really what we should be doing is archiving, which is.
Well,
Or just not deleting.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Delete, and I tell this to staff when we talk about records, delete is not your friend.
No.
If in doubt, don't delete. If my wife happens to email me to pick up bread on the way home, that I may delete. But yeah, yes. So I really do urge staff, and you as well, and Brian was probably thinking the same thing, just simply don't delete. And what our system will do to maximize the efficiency of your machine is place and archive emails after a certain age. At which point you can still get to them. You just have to go to this archive folder, which keeps them in a different place within our server.
Okay. But definitely avoid deleting. Any thoughts on SMS, since we do not have village issued cell phones, anything like that? Avoid it at all costs? Would you like to think about it?
I mean,
Yeah.
I would avoid texting if you can. I've yet to see that come up in litigation. I struggle with the idea that a text would be a record, simply from the standpoint of I equate that more to like a phone call, and we don't have an obligation to, if you get a phone call from a constituent, to take notes and then to essentially PDF those notes and keep the record. I think the Department of Justice would tell you that they believe it should be a text. Sometimes I don't agree with the Department of Justice. I'm sorry, a text should be a record. Thank you. I think we're waiting to see what the courts are going to say on that issue. I mean, to me, it gets into also potentially some maintenance issues. Now, that might be more just my lack of IT knowledge on how to maintain texts, but I know exactly how to maintain emails, and so potentially, yes, they are. If you can avoid text on governmental business, that's probably the easiest way to approach it.
Okay. And then one last one. As we receive paper mail, one of the things that we've received recently was the Clean Lakes Alliance publication, an entire, book kind of thing. I would assume we're not going to archive something like that.
I don't think
someplace.
that's not something that's specifically related to your governmental business. That's information related. I think if you get that, you can toss it.
Delete.
Yeah, well, but that's, I mean,
Physical
that's not, that is not being sent to you because with information or a question related to policy issues in the village. That's generally, as if I understand the publication you're getting, probably generally being sent to every elected official in Dane County.
Yep.
I don't believe that that's something that you would need to maintain. Now, at the same time, if you utilize it to talk to staff about a particular issue, oh, I saw this in here, then you may have crossed. Now you've kind of taken information that you've received, talked about it in your governmental capacity with a staff member. At that point, it may be, hey, can you just hold on to this? And, again, you have the ability to be the custodian of records if you want to. If you receive something, whether it's, and you just like, I'm going to hold on to this, you can do that under the law. I just think it's easier for you if essentially you rely on Carla and other village staff members to be the custodian, in part because when we get a public records request, if we know that we're the custodian here, then we can run the searches and we don't need to contact you and say you need to run searches yourself. If you are going to take on custodial duties yourself, then you become part of the public records response process, which is going to create work for you.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you.
The other, without leaving, and this is more of one thing that I just want to make sure that you understand, your own personal notes are not records under the public records law. So if you've been sitting here tonight, let's say, and this applies to if you had printed out the packet and you made your own notes and then you keep them, those aren't records. If you have this is beyond my IT capability, but my understanding is if you have a PDF, you can create comments and then save those comments on the PDF. If those are your own personal notes, those are not records under the public records law. So don't be afraid that if you do that, then all of a sudden the information that you put in your notes would be something that would have to be turned over. Okay, now to social media. And I'm going to give you the caveat on the front end that I despise social media. I don't use it in any way, shape, or form other than my firm made me go on LinkedIn probably about 12 years ago. I think it's like I said in the outline, it's fantastic for communicating facts. And to the extent that it's utilized for that purpose, great. But when you start getting into, sharing your opinion, sharing policy positions, It's not that you can't do it. You can do it, but then it starts to become a little bit more dangerous for you. The worst thing that's going to happen to you as an elected official is maybe you're not going to be able to participate in something. Part of what I have in the opening paragraph is, well, let's say when we have zoning change request, or let's say a land division requests, the applicants have property rights. And, the example I would give is, and these are the extremes. Okay. So, because obviously you're all elected, and when you ran for office and you shared your opinion on a number of topics. And so it's perfectly reasonable for you now, and when you're running for office, to say, I'm a little concerned with sprawl. And I want to make sure that if we are going to use up parkland for development, whether it's residential or industrial or things of that nature, that we really think that through, and we think about the impact that that's having on the farming community. That's a totally reasonable statement. If you end up voting against something because you don't like the fact that there's sprawl, you've done nothing inappropriate with that statement. You've just stated your opinion. We all come to our meetings with a particular viewpoint, a particular perspective. You don't have to set those aside. You get to bring them in, but you need to have an open mind. If you walk in the door and you say, there's no way that I'm ever going to allow this particular development to ever occur in this nature, because there's nothing that could happen. I know the individual who is doing the development, and I just oppose everything that they stand for. You're not going to be able to participate in when those applications come forward, because now you are no longer an independent fact finder, and you've gone past kind of your policy viewpoints, and you're not an impartial decision maker. And so again, those are the extremes. I've never seen anything. I mean, certainly we've had viewpoint discussions, and you get to say that when you're running. I've never heard anybody say anything during the latter, but just be aware that when you get into social media, what you put on social media potentially can be used if you ever were to do that. I don't think that you would, but again, my experience with social media is that people, when they start expressing policy positions and opinions, sometimes get a little carried away because it's so easy to put it down right away. You're caught in the moment. And so then you say something that maybe if you thought about it for 10 minutes, you wouldn't say. And that's one of the reasons why I dislike social media. At the same time, I understand that you're going to utilize it, and I'm not telling you not to use it. But like your question before, Kristen, there definitely is overlap. So one of the things, and this, again, this is something that, 5 years ago, I think if you looked at the guide for public records law, you wouldn't have seen it, but now you see it. And so in the DOJ guide, it says electronic records include content posted by or on behalf of authorities to social media sites, and authorities includes elected officials, such as Facebook and Twitter, to the extent that the content relates to government business. If an authority uses social media, the content must be produced if it is responsive to a public records request. This includes not only live content, but also past content. And then you also have custodial duties. Now, one of the things about being a custodian is with the email examples that we gave before, the village can be the custodian of the records because you've used the village email account. Okay, easy. If you have your own Facebook page, now the village at a staff level does not have access to that page. And so you, as an elected official, if you talk about governmental business, if you have a Facebook page and you never talk about governmental business at all, it's purely personal, then don't worry about it. It's if you talk about governmental issues, and that's not just giving your opinion on something, that's also using it very appropriately, saying, hey, we have a meeting, letting everybody know that the village board had a meeting at 6 o'clock tonight, or, hey, making everyone aware, because I know that you talked about this at informationally, kind of like the committee reports. Robert, at I think the previous meeting, talked about some of the stuff that's going on at the state legislature regarding shared revenue and other issues. To the extent that, and that's good information, but if you put that on the Facebook page as it relates back to the village of Waunakee, now we're talking about governmental business, and you as the elected official are going to have an obligation to make sure that you maintain those records for 7 years. And I don't know exactly what all goes into that. That just means that, let's say, let's say you've been on the village board for 5 years and all of a sudden we get a public records request that says, I want Joe Smith's Facebook, content for the last 5 years, which from a time period standpoint is appropriate for a public records request. In other words, people don't have the ability to go back to 1980 on a public records request, but as long as they're asking for something within the past 7 years, which is, essentially our maintenance requirement, we're going to have an obligation to provide those records if we have anything that falls within the scope. So if you establish your own Facebook page, you're going to have to maintain everything that's on that page related to governmental business for at least a 7-year period. And then, I would say still the example that I gave on, litigation or public records responses. Here, if the village is not able to maintain your social media page, if we get a public records request, then we're going to end up having to work with you as an elected official, and you're going to have to work with us to respond to that records request because your social media page will have had governmental business on it. We don't have access to it. You're the custodian, so you're going to have to provide that information.
Trisha had a question.
Yep.
Just clarifying. So if there had been something, for example, LinkedIn, I'll use that because it's pretty common. And we are promoting something that was approved and perhaps the Tribune had already done an article on it, like maybe the Housing Betterment Fund or something that we're saying, this is a cool thing that Waunakee did and shared the article. Does that count, or since it's already been made public, we're not discussing it or voting on it at that time?
That's still going to count.
Okay.
Because, it's probably only a little bit of new information, but your post to share it, the post that you've provided is different from the publication that was initially made by the Tribune. So your post in and of itself constitutes a record as it relates back to governmental business.
Even if we don't comment on it?
Even if you don't comment.
And what about before we were elected? I had a candidate page, for example, and then the election happened. Am I responsible for everything that was on that candidate page before I was?
I need to confirm this for you, but I believe that no, it's only the public records law goes into effect once you've taken your position. Anything prior as a candidate, I do not believe is subject to the records law, and then not subject to maintenance requirements.
But if I run for reelection now?
Yes,
everything
because
on
now
it-
you will
yes, okay.
will be an elected official when you did that.
What if I don't get reelected then after I leave office?
Well,
I mean,
that's
there could be,
yeah. I
right?
mean,
So-
that's the tricky issue, I think, for municipalities right now. I have somebody who has been an elected official for the last 4 years. They have a social media page that I, as the municipality, do not have access to. Let's say the person just decides they're not going to run. Within the 7-year maintenance period, I believe that all of those posts that relate to governmental business are still public records that would need to be provided. And so one of the things the municipality, usually when somebody leaves their position, then there's language in the statutes talking about essentially, how do I provide the records that I have been maintaining as the custodian, and I provide them to the next person. Well, here, this is a little, you didn't have packets of information. You had your own social media page. I think one of the things that municipal staff needs to work through is how do we get that information so that if we get a public records request, and I haven't seen any case law on that issue. And I do believe that the Department of Justice, for example, would say, look, we want to work with you to find a workable solution. But at the end of the day, for that 4-year period, when you were an elected official and you had a Facebook page, let's say, and you were commenting on governmental business, those are still records.
So I was, maybe I misread something I thought there was some guidance out there that said that if you maintained a candidate page separate from an elected official page, that it was.
Oh, that may be yeah, I guess I would have to look at that. That might be the case. I was assuming that it was just one page, because then all of a sudden you'd kind of have potentially a mixture of, here's the things that I'm saying that I'm running about, and here's the thing that I'm commenting on that I'm dealing with right now as a member of the body. I can check on whether or not you could set up separate pages.
Okay, because that's provisionally what I have set up. I haven't done anything with the other one because I was waiting for your presentation tonight.
Okay.
After we discussed this earlier. My other statement was going to be, and maybe this is more towards the boards and staff, if we want to come up with the policy, it is very easy in this era to download all of your data from social media once you're done. So I mean, it's kind of a handshake agreement, I would think, if somebody left and didn't want to turn it over. But I mean, we could just say, hey, if you're going to do it, acknowledging that this is reality, download everything at the end and then hand it off to the custodian if it's not an overburdensome thing to the village. So just a thought on that process. I know that you're not social media.
No, I'm just, I mean, we need to come, but we do need to come up with a process that allows for somebody's been on the board, they're no longer on the board, the whatever social media aspect that they have, the village needs to be able to respond to a public records request where that information potentially falls within the scope. And so, yeah, my guess is, or my belief is along the lines of what you're saying, we would have to have something where somebody would agree, okay, let me figure out a way to give this to you.
Carla's eyebrows went way up. You want to co-own all of our
That's just
pages,
because we have
right?
unlimited storage for everything. I'm sure.
I was gonna say, even at a staff level, this is tricky. There's a number of social media sites that put out different types of information. And there's times when we as staff believe we could very easily answer that question in one full swoop with a quick post. But when we do, and we really take our time with those decisions. When we do that, we enter the fray of that forum in our government capacity. And I have at times had to printed off physically that segment under which I commented, or copied it, sent an email to myself, creating the record of our entrance into the foray. When we're trying to just get day-to-day work done, to then go into those steps in that is tricky. So there's been times when I've felt that the village has been actually kind of challenged by some to be more attentive to and aggressive is not the right word, attentive to other non-government social media pages to call things out, to clarify the record, et cetera, et cetera. And I just outlined for you what makes that tricky for us.
I mean, even in the most recent leak training that the village had us go through for the newly elected, I mean, they even state in there that they're encouraging the use of social media in there responsibly, but they are encouraging it because it's about meeting constituents where they are, and they're obviously younger generation likes to be online as opposed to in person.
It's a tricky dance. What Jared and I have been doing is we monitor occasionally other social media forums, and if we see something that needs attention, what we've tried to do is put it onto our Facebook page with a thought that someone will have a light bulb go off and then share it. Share it off to the other pages. All right, cool. We didn't do that. Our record is still, the one we created is here in our account. So we would encourage that, even if, to take the lead and go for it.
So, I mean, we've kind of talked about how social media overlaps with the public records law. It also overlaps with the open meetings law for a lot of the reasons that we talked about earlier. In other words, so one thing that I would say is if your fellow elected officials have a Facebook page or other social media, maybe have an agreement that you're not going to go onto their pages and make comments, because that's where you start getting to all of a sudden, if Joe's got a page and then Aaron comments on it and it's related to governmental business. Oh, we want to do, I'm trying to think of something kind of, I don't know, some type of, not necessarily a controversial issue, something that everyone agrees on. Well, as soon as Joe puts it out there and Aaron comments it and then Kristen comments it, oh my goodness, now we've had three village board members comments on something that's potentially going to come from before the body. One way to do that is basically say, look, we each have an agreement that we may view the pages of other elected officials, but we're not going to comment on those pages. And the other thing kind of gets at, one of the reasons why when we have public comments, we stress that, let's say somebody makes a comment before you at a meeting. And, if it's an informational comment, and let's say the resident just happens to be mistaken about something, staff has the ability to comment and respond to that. if we start, and it may be that there are times when as village board members, you really want to jump in and comment on it. The issue becomes, okay, Joe Smith makes a comment or Jane Smith makes a comment and one village board member responds to it. That in and of itself is not violated the open meetings law because you haven't had a discussion. But you might have other board members who want to be able to talk about it too. And now you've kind of jumped in line, talked about it first, and effectively prohibited them from commenting. And to me, it's like, okay, let's staff handle it. Or if it's important enough, then it can be put on a future agenda and everybody can talk about it. Similar situation potentially with social media of, if Robert's got a page and one person jumps on there and comments on it, that in and of itself is not going to be a violation of the open meeting law. But you might have other board members who wanted to comment on too, and now they've effectively been prohibited. So that, I think goes back to the idea of, yeah, you may all have 7 individual Facebook pages and you can view each other, but let's maybe not make comments for on each other's pages. That's going to help protect all of you.
All right. Thank you.
And again, what we just covered, what is, hundreds of pages of guides and outlines in about a half hour. So there's a lot more out there. That's why I stress, if this is something that you want to look at further, the Department of Justice guidelines are so valuable, and the tables of contents are very good too. So it's not like you got to look at all 96 pages. You can kind of find what you need to look at by looking at the table.
Okay. And when we're confused, we call you. Right?
Yeah, you can- Yeah, I've been doing this quite a while too, and Carla and I both are attentive to this issue within the organization. Start with staff. If we can't help you, then we'll bring in Brian and trying to get those things answered. Since I've been here, we've probably had a presentation like this maybe 4 times before the board. Every time it's getting more and more interesting. And it may be good practice for us on an annual basis to get a primer internally in these walls.
Mhm.
So the 7 of you can talk together, ask questions that you have of the attorney. I know we've got the league and they help, but I did want to finish just by sharing this, which I found quite interesting. That's Brian's LinkedIn photo from 12 years ago. I did confirm that he is in fact on LinkedIn. There he is.
You were 12 when you became an attorney. So-
2009 right there.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think they do. I have not updated it.
It says on his page, he's never even posted yet. So
Yeah.
he's not even commented or.
Well, if it makes you feel better, up until last month, mine was my 2009 picture too. So, had a different color hair and was a lot younger. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you very much. It is really important stuff. Obviously, we're entering new territory and we've got some movement forward in some new arenas with social media and whatnot that I think some of us will start engaging in. All right, next item on the agenda is public hearing, discuss and take action to approve update to park impact fees. It's page 87 if you're following around in your packet. And Tim, is this to you? Todd? Renee?
I thought it was going to be you, Sue, because to summarize what's happening at the Parks Committee. Or how are we doing it? I guess we did not plan this out very well.
It does say
'Cause it-
presenter Sue McDade and Renee.
It went to
Michaels.
Parks.
I can
was
take
following,
team.
Yeah.
So this is the annual review of the park impact fee. Renee and I work together on it. It's a comprehensive review of the values of the parks throughout the village, then divided by the number of residents in the village, which we come up with a per person value of parks, which is then calculated into the park impact fee. Renee does all the math. I just say, looks good. Park committee did review it at their meeting last week and approved it really without much conversation. The fee increased about $60. The beauty of our process is that we update this fee annually. So there are no large jumps and surprises to developers when they have to pay that fee annually.
Any questions? Right, go ahead. I'm sorry. Donna.
Sue, what is the balance in the account for park impact fees?
Renee, do you have, oh, there it is.
I can pull it up.
You got it before I do? $1,111,721.49.
Okay, I love our parks and I use the parks. I have grandchildren who use the parks and my kids used to live in the parks. And I understand how valuable and how people love them. But I worked on the housing task force. And with that, park impact fees were talked about and other fees that help raise the cost of building or owning a home or living in an apartment in Waunakee. I realized that the committee decided that it would not be appropriate to eliminate park impact fees. But I'm questioning the rate at which they're growing and whether we should look at it as a total project and what it's doing overall to other aspects of programs and issues in the community. That's just a thought of mine, but I think it's important that we look at it as a total, how it's affecting the village, housing, and those are just my.
Right, other comments? Yeah, or questions?
I'm a little curious as to why, and I maybe kind of know the answer. We're basing it just on single family residence, multifamily, that sort of thing versus looking at the value of new construction or anything of that nature.
I think that so when we last did the study, because in order to have a park impact fee, you have to have there's statutory things that happen, including a study. I think that that is the basis for the park impact fee. Like you look at it in those categories. I think 2019 might have been the last time we did a full study. That's when we added the new category for group quarters, which is like for the memory care and things of those natures. So I think this formula that we follow, I mean, it definitely follows the study that our consultant did, and I think it lines up with the statutes.
Okay.
If that helps.
Other questions? Trisha, did you have one?
No, just real quick. How does this compare relatively to other communities as far as the rate per household and the density level? It was probably in the study that Renee you just referenced, but just if you.
It was, and I did not bring that with me tonight, so I hesitate to.
No glaring differences or things that were noticeable, I guess.
I think we're on top of our impact fee. Many communities implement an impact fee and then just let it sit for years and years and years. And so we have been very proactive in renewing that on an annual basis. So sometimes we maybe get ahead of other communities and then they have to play catch up and make big changes.
Any other questions? None? All right, seeing none, do we have any further discussion or is there a motion?
I will move approval of the resolution approving updated park impact fees.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion before we move to question?
We forgot the public hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
Good job.
So we exhausted Brian.
Brian's presentation.
Now we shall have a public hearing. All right, we will open the public hearing at, and I have to say the time, am I correct? 6:04 PM. So
8:04.
I'm having a banner day today, folks.
And we have no public comment cards, so I'm not sure if there's anybody in the audience that still wants to speak of this, but.
Right. Is there anyone online?
Yep, just check. There are no attendees on.
Okay, there are no attendees online. We may now close the public hearing at 8:05 PM. So it was either a 2-hour hearing or I misspoke earlier. All right, Now, do we have any discussion or questions?
We still have an
Yeah.
open motion.
Still
so
an
I
open
think
motion. Do we have a first and a second?
We did.
You did, yes. So do we have any further discussion before we go to question? Seeing none, let's call the question. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. All right. Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you all for bearing with me there for a second. Second public hearing on the recommendation on a request by RDC Westport Farms LLC to rezone from the Village of Waunakee C2 to the Village of Waunakee R1 and R2, 49.5 acres for the purpose of developing single-family home sites. And this is on page 87 if you are following along in your, or 89, if you are following along in your packet. So we'll open the public, well, presentation first, public hearing second. Wait. We don't have this in our packets? Tim has it. All right, thank you, Tim.
The applicant wishes to have action on this item postponed. Just by way of a little bit of background, I mentioned during my remarks regarding Joint Plan Commission, the town of Westport approved a preliminary plat for this item. The Joint Plan Commission made a recommendation on the rezoning. However, certain information relating to stormwater with the plat has come to light that may result in some of the lots being realigned. And rather than acting on this request now, the applicant would like to wait until that final plat is finalized so that the zoning aligns with the final plat. So therefore, they're requesting postponement of action.
All right. And do we need to make a motion to postpone action on that or, okay, all right, no? Right, you're shaking your head yes, and Brian's shaking his head no. So, okay, all right. It'll come back. Excellent. So on to business items then. Business item 1, discuss and take action on amendments to the display of flags and street lighting policy on page 94 of your packet.
So obviously, we had a discussion at one of our last board meetings regarding the policy that we have. I think at that meeting, staff had mentioned that we had talked about a Supreme Court case in Boston. In that case, the majority opinion had identified a policy in San Jose that I had looked at, which policy tries to make more clear that this is government speech as opposed to private speech related to, in our case, putting flags on a flagpole or having something, a color on our lights. And so if you look at page 95 of the packet, within the purpose and scope, this is the primary change that's being, would be reflected if you approve it. There are a few other changes within the document. The other changes are made more, I would say, as cleanup, just to make clear that to the extent that we are displaying a commemorative flag or we have changed the color of the lights on the street lights, that it is action being taken by the village board and explicitly by the village board. So I wouldn't say substantive changes later in the document. The substantive changes is in the purpose and scope. And again, this is language that is consistent with the San Jose policy to make clear that this is not private speech. This is governmental speech. It is action that we are taking, again, based on the policy, based on a request made by board members. And so I'm certainly willing to answer any questions, but this is just an attempt by staff to try to bring the policy as much as we can into the scope of the discussion at the Supreme Court level.
What questions do we have or comments do we have for Brian or about the proposed changes?
I guess I just never noticed this, but under section 5, sub A, sub C, do we really explicitly have to state in our policy that it's that colors on village streetlights is to bring awareness to a public health issue?
Well, my understanding is the reason why we changed the lights is specifically for that reason. And so I do, you know, if you want it to be broader than that, then I think you could potentially change the policy. But if the thought process is that's the reason why we're going to do it, I actually think it helps you if anybody were to challenge this, because your public health clearly is something that a governmental body would be concerned about.
I understand that, but in A, we specifically give the example of national diabetes. I'm honestly not aware of any other health issues that require like color changes besides National Diabetes Month. So I was just wondering why we can't just explicitly call out National Diabetes Month.
I guess the only thing that I would say is I am aware of other, for example, certain cancers that have colors that are specifically associated with them. And to the extent that a request were to be made as a part of that, I mean, that may make sense.
Are we, you mean like breast cancer awareness being pink, things like
Yeah.
that? Okay. Right.
SWASA actually does pink lights in October. Interesting. Other questions? Comments? Joe?
Sure. So up in section 1, certainly we can say all of the stuff about it, you know, being the village board's expression. But I think the reality is that if somebody is driving through our village, the interpretation that they will have in the absence of knowing exactly what this policy says is that that view, that commemorative flag, those lights, whatever it might be, at least in some way represents the residents of the village. That may not be our intent, but I think that would be probably a reasonable way for them to look at that. And you know, so I that's just, I guess, what it is. The only other thing that I saw in here was section 4, let's see, what is it? 4A, 1E. Talks about, for avoidance of doubt, the village board retains the authority and discretion under this policy to display a commemorative flag for a shorter period of time than requested, and may also remove a commemorative flag to allow a different commemorative flag to be displayed. I would like to actually change that to the second part of that to read, let's see. Under this policy to display a commemorative flag for a shorter period of time than requested, and may also remove or replace a commemorative flag previously approved to be displayed at their discretion. Basically saying that we could choose to take down a flag that we had previously approved. I'm not sure how we would handle that potential change, but.
Well, and then just to be clear, so every time you're going to put a flag up there, it's going to come back to you.
Sure.
Okay, so you're talking about a scenario where potentially you've, let's say, approved a flag to go up at the first meeting of a month, but now are deciding to take it down. I mean, I'm certainly okay with the change. I think you have that authority whether you make the change or not, but that's, I think the reason why, my recollection as to why this particular language is stated the way it is right now is we were thinking about a situation where one particular flag has been, and I actually think we were thinking about today, where a flag has been approved and now maybe for a specific day, we want to allow a different flag to go up there. But I think your language would potentially, essentially get us to the same spot. That's just why I think that's the way it's stated right now.
Sure. It feels to me like our only option, should we want to remove a flag, is to put up another one. And once we've approved it, we have to let that time run. That's.
I guess would D under that right above the dates are determined by the village board?
Well, I guess what I would say is there's no question in my mind that if you approve a flag at one meeting, you have the ability to take it down at the next. That it completely falls within your discretion. Whether we have E the way it's stated now, the way that, the modification, or we take it out entirely. I mean, at the end of the day, you are the body that makes the decision on that, which is really the key aspect of allowing us, because what you hit on before is, with your first comment, is where, let's just say, at least four of the justices are right now, and they would say, I don't care about your policy. This is private speech cloaked in governmental speech, and we're gonna treat it as such. The board's absolute control over the flagpoles is the one thing I think that's assisting us, and that's already within the policy.
Okay.
All right, other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, is there a motion that anyone would like to make?
A motion to approve the proposed amendments to the display of flags and street lighting policy as drafted by the village attorney.
I'll second it.
All right, any discussion on the motion? No? Seeing none, let's move to vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, the motion carries. Next item on the books is, or on the agenda is discuss and take action on an organizational modification to Public Works Department Fleet Maintenance Department, including the creation of positions of Fleet Maintenance Supervisor and Fleet Maintenance Technician and crew members on page 101 of your packet. And I believe, Bill, are you, right, you're presenting?
Yep, I'll be
Excellent.
kicking it off here. Thank you. So with the retirement of Pete Sukamel from the Public Works Department, we'll be having a vacancy in the Public Works Department. And anytime there is a departure, we treat it as an opportunity to look and evaluate to make sure that our organizational structure is still the most efficient that it can be. And so we did that in this case as well. And one of the areas that we identified, and when I say we, I should clarify, I'm primarily talking about the Public Works Department and our administration, that we identified was some need for the mechanic function that we have and the fleet maintenance functions that we provide. Going back to 2015, we had 99 pieces of equipment that our mechanic maintains. In just 8 short years, that number has ballooned to 129 plus additional apparatus and pieces of equipment. If you include everything from the police, the utilities, and EMS, the total is up to 188 pieces, so almost double in 8 years. And then if you include, there is some potential fire apparatus in there as well that is dealt with separately, but nonetheless is something that Kurt, our mechanic, works on. When we sat down and looked at the position and the duties and our needs, we basically came to the conclusion that Kurt needs some more help, just based upon the workload that's there. So what we're proposing that we do here is basically to fill the position that has been vacated right now with a 50-50 position. So going from a full crew member position to a 50% fleet technician position, and then the other 50% still being a crew member. We would look to fill that position, basically advertise for it immediately. So first thing tomorrow morning. So this position would be supervised by the current mechanic, Kurt. So we would look to change his position to a fleet maintenance supervisor position. And then down the road, as we've made some allusions to in the past, for the long-term staffing plan, we would look to then add an additional 100% crew member for 2024. So to kind of illustrate what that means for the short term, if this all goes forward, we would be basically taking 50% of what our crew member is now, moving that over to the fleet maintenance, and then 6 months from now, hopefully, January 2024, we've got a full-time position back. So we're actually coming ahead 50% from where we are today, if that makes sense on the crew side. So the last thing I want to touch on is the revenue for this. So currently we do bill out some of Kurt's time, well, all of his time when he's working on other departments' equipment. So the utilities, EMS, and police. We would look to maintain that structure, but change the fee, which is right now his total comp. We would change that to $70 an hour flat fee. Now that's not set in stone. That's what we're proposing right now, and we would evaluate that over time. But basically, we'd be billing that at a fixed hourly rate for both Kurt's time and this technician's time. That will cover total comp as well as some overhead. So with that, we have included in the packet proposed job descriptions and job duties for each position, as well as at the very end, an illustration just showing on our wage scale what these changes look like. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. What questions do we have or comments?
What do you think the chances are of finding someone to take this position in this climate?
Well, it is difficult to find any position, and this is a slightly more specialized one, but I mean, I guess I don't want to speak for Bill or necessarily out of line here, but I think even struggling in today's labor market wouldn't necessarily be a reason not to create a position that addresses our needs. That's how I would.
And what we have done, Nyla, is we have looked carefully at other communities where they're paying similar positions, and believe what we're proposing here is a rate that will put us in the marketplace, put us in the hunt. If that doesn't work for us, we may have to talk more about a more aggressive pay structure. But and you've given administration some flexibility in that already. We're hoping that what we're proposing is going to put us in the hunt for a position.
Okay, and how soon would you like to fill this position?
Well, as Jared mentioned, we would, if approved, we would post tomorrow. A process best case scenario, we'll have someone here in a month and a half to 2 months.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Just a comment. Yeah, just a comment. I think just in general practice, anytime that there's a position, so a departure or a vacancy that's created to evaluate the department or the organizational needs is smart. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into this recommendation.
Thank you. All right, other comments or questions?
Yeah, I'm curious, based on the way things are done today versus the way they'd be done with the flat rate hourly charge, is there any significant amount of effort that would go into doing that time tracking?
Not at all. Our current time sheet software, it's all you literally just clock in, clock out on a digital timesheet, and you can choose which account it basically is getting billed to.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other comments? No.
Yeah. Fortunately, Bill took me to meet Kurt when I was early after I got elected. So the one thing I thought when I walked through was like, wow, if this one person gets hurt or gets sick, we're in a lot of trouble. So I'm really happy to see that we're doing this. I think this is extremely important. I think that our volunteer services rely heavily upon this as well. I think the $70 an hour personally, I think that's fair based off of how much things would probably cost in an open market. So I think it's a win for everybody across the board. I would just state that I would like to, me personally, I hope the board would as well would want to just see some long-term tracking, information about what happens when it does move to 70, just because the one thing I'm not really seeing in here, and maybe you've talked with them, but I don't know how those other, how EMS and how fire feel about paying $70 at a flat fee, if that was contemplated or not. But just something that would, I think, be of concern to the board over time.
I'm not sure if Jared was in those conversations, but Bill, Ryan, Kurt, and I have met probably 4 times over the past several months with those organizations to talk this through. In fact, I would say they helped us assemble this as a proposal. They understand market rates and know that the open market is going to be much steeper, and that this is a good starting point for us. And they, along with the village, are open-minded enough to know that that we will learn from our first year. And if we need to talk more deeply about adjustments in coming years, we do that again, collaboratively, as we did to put this proposal together.
Okay, I feel 100% better about it.
Other comments or questions? All right, Nyla, did you have one? No. All right, then seeing none, do we have a motion?
I move to approve the reorganization of the Public Works fleet maintenance functions, including creation of the fleet maintenance supervisor position placed at grade H14 and the fleet maintenance technician crew member placed at grade H12.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, do we have any discussion before we move to question?
I would only, Kristen, just say, hey, Kurt, attaboy for the past, how many years it's been.
It's fantastic.
Really found the way, and appreciate your involvement in helping us come up with solutions.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Because I have to do the payroll. When was this going to be proposed to go into effect? Immediately, like tomorrow, or? Okay.
Yep, that's the plan.
Okay, thank you.
All right. No other discussion, no further questions, any more? No? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, thank you very much. Thanks for all the work that went into this. Item number 3, consider proposals from Fred Kolkman Tennis and Sport Service LLC for plans and specifications and construction maintenance for 2024 court projects. That's on page 116 of your packet.
I'm ready. So this is a standard agreement. We've been working with Fred Kolkman and his team for many years on the either construction or rehabilitation of our court surfaces throughout the village. We have 2 projects in the budget for next year, the replacement of the Scenic Valley basketball court, which is currently a half court, and we are proposing to replace that full court basketball. We're finding that those basketball courts are very popular throughout the village. And then the second one is the Westbridge tennis courts. There's 2 courts there, and that is a rehabilitation project. Over the last few years, we've just had wonderful luck with Fred and his team. The first part of his proposals is to create the design and the bid documents. And then once projects are bid, if they're successful, the second part of his project is to provide inspection services for us. This was at the Park Committee meeting last week and was recommended for approval.
All right, thank you, Sue. Any questions or discussion? No?
I will move to approve the proposals from Fred Kolkman Tennis and Sports Services LLC plans and specifications and construction management for 2024 court projects.
I'll second it.
And Erin, you had a question, I think.
Yeah, I guess if we are making that change at Scenic Valley, was there any of the previously presented ADA things that we should loop in with that? And you would, I guess we could look at if we needed to have more funding like that.
Yep, so these courts currently meet all the ADA guidelines, and we will make sure that they continue to do so.
Did the park have anything else, like, I guess anything else that we could say we want that to just be done while there's other work there?
Got it. Good point, and we'll have to take a look at that.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, Joe?
Yeah, so there was a bunch of tennis court work that was done a couple years back. Was that the same
Yep.
vendor? I was gonna say, I think we've been using them for quite a while.
Long time.
Yeah, it's been quality stuff.
All right, any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, let's move to vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Next item up on the list, consider proposals for purchase and installation of the Prairie Park Shelter, page 129, and I believe that's you again, Sue.
Yep, so this project has been on our project list for many years. Actually, it was originally intended to be funded through the Parks Paygo Fund. It was our intention, small open air shelter designed in a neighborhood park to be a place to park your stroller while your baby can be in the shade while your kids play on the playground, maybe have a little birthday party. Not a community gathering place, but really a neighborhood facility. We originally intended to have our Parks and Public Works crew complete the installation of the project. They clearly have the skills and the abilities within the crew to do that kind of work. We also thought it would be something kind of out of the ordinary that they would enjoy. The workload just did not allow that to happen. We put it off year after year, and I would say, Bill, are we ready? And he'd say, there's no way. So we have transitioned this project to include the construction of the facility. We prepared an RFP that offered potential partners to bid it in a variety of different ways. We received responses from 4 different companies. Staff narrowed it down to commercial recreation specialists out of Verona. They offered 4 options for us to consider. The purchase of the kit as well as the installation. We've had very good luck with this particular firm. In fact, they were the ones who helped us install the disc golf course recently in Rip Park. We reviewed this with the park committee at our meeting last week, and they made the recommendation to bring to you that we choose the 24 by 28 wood classic shelter. Total cost in this package of $65,095. And after some work with Renee and our financial consultants, we have determined that this is a project that will be eligible to be funded out of the impact fee account.
All right, what questions or discussion do we have? All right, none? Seeing no discussion, do we have a motion?
I'd recommend to move to approve the proposal from Commercial Recreation Specialists for the purchase and installation of the Wood Classic 8 shelter in Prairie Park for a proposed price of $65,095.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? Oh, Nyla.
I have a question. So are we saying that the funds will come from, where are the funds coming from?
When Sue earlier said that $1 million that we have, it will
Okay.
come from that.
Okay, thank you.
Because we do have an obligation to spend those within a time limit of the statute, so we need to keep spending them
Okay,
as we go.
thank you.
All right, any other questions or further discussion? Seeing none, let's move to question. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Next item on the list, discuss and take action on EMS district agreement, page 139. And I believe, Robert, you are presenting this.
Yes. So I wanted to bring everybody, it's in the packet, a Word version of the agreement, but I just want to show everybody for effect here. This is the original agreement and the agreement that is still in place. It is typewritten. It's signed by people over 40 years ago. This is our EMS district agreement. We haven't updated it since we signed it back in the late 70s. There are great items within it that we desperately need to update. And the way that we do that in speaking with the current chair of the EMS committee, which is Administrator Grosskopf of Westport, we've come to an agreement as a committee that each of our respective municipalities will need to weigh in as a body, as we are only representatives of our, of our respective municipalities. We should not be acting on our own individual choice in there. So with that being said, as indicated within the packet, this is an introduction. If this is your first time looking at this, great. This was also the first time for many of the people that serve on the EMS commission at the last EMS commission didn't know this. There's great things in here. For example, allegedly, I'm supposed to get paid $5 a meeting for every time that we have an EMS committee meeting. So it's a bit outdated. That being said, and the levity aside, there is a very contentious item that I would draw your attention to in here, and that is under section 6, under withdrawal from district. This is an area that one commission member called Pandora's box. And what that means is that, well, everybody knows the story of Pandora's box, but what it means in this withdrawal agreement would be that currently, if a district wishes to withdraw from, say, the fire district, they're paid out after about, I think it's either 1 year or 18 months. In the case of this district, if somebody withdraws, they don't actually get paid out until the district dissolves. So this means that the remaining members of the district, if they sense that there is no reason to remain within the district, could literally run the value down to 0, which would basically mean a payout of $0 to the village of Waunakee at the end of the withdrawal period. So it's something that we probably would want to discuss how we could have some parity to how the fire district is set up. Another item that I would draw attention to in here is they currently do not have any sort of organizational rules in there whatsoever. So Administrator Grosskopf, who I'd remind everybody used to be an elected official, he is now the administrator for the village, or sorry, for the town of Westport. He's not a supervisor in the town of Westport, has been serving as the chair for quite some time and has not been elected into that position. So the village really has, and I think I say this with no disrespect to previous EMS committee members, but as the commission feels, The village hasn't really shown a lot of interest in what was going on at the EMS district, mostly because I guess if everything was running fine, there was nothing to worry about. They have also taken that to mean that the village just doesn't care what happens. So they were a little surprised that I brought this up. And it actually took some doing to have even the initial discussion at the commission. But there is a general agreement that we do need to update this. So with that being said, I had asked for this to be placed on the agenda now so that we could communicate it out to the rest of the board. But I would like to have a discussion at the next board meeting on July 3rd, as that will give us time before the next EMS commission, where we'll go in for the first round of proposed changes. As a reminder to my fellow board members, we do only have one vote. This is a 6-member commission. And so it would take quite a few other municipalities to agree with some of the changes. So while I like to think and dream big on some of these items, we have to recognize that other municipalities will have their own motivations and wants to not make certain changes. So we should be cognizant of that when we ask for things, that there will definitely need to be a measure of compromise involved with any changes to this.
Any questions for Robert?
Yeah, no,
No
just want
question.
to procedurally, want to see if we can kind of stage this along so we can be successful at getting feedback, then working towards recommendations that you can take back. If you want to bring this back in a couple of weeks for the board to give feedback on, are you expecting that then will allow us as staff the chance to take that feedback, work with you, and bring back sort of a more formal set of proposals that would then come back to the board again for confirmation?
If that's the way that the board would like to do it. I'm just the representative. So
I'm just wondering if that fits with what timing expectations are of the commission or the EMS committee.
So the commission meets normally on the second Thursday of the month, which is why I was hoping that we could have something that I could at least have something to go back with after the first meeting. We already know as a commission that this is going to take months, that we're not expecting to accomplish everything in the July meeting. So even if we can have just a perfunctory while we work on a more formal item, that will at least give me some direction when I'm having the conversation with the other municipalities, as to where the village stands on some of these things.
And one other thought I had for our approach prior to the next meeting, so that the board has kind of some meat to chew on. I asked Brian if we could take this approach, possibly have kind of a small work group with you, Robert, and Kristen, along with staff and the village attorney, hash some things out to maybe put some conceptual modifications in front of you. Again, meat to chew on, so that you can have a really productive meeting. Is that something that the board would be okay with?
I feel like that would be a good, on July 3rd, to come prepared with some ideas and have had the
Well, have
time
it
to
in your
think about
packet
them.
even.
Yeah, in our
Yeah.
packet, I think would be a good idea.
Yeah, I intended to have something, right, whether it was something I worked with staff on directly, or if we have that's fine with
Yeah.
me. I'll do it either.
I just want to feel that we had a consensus from the board that was okay for you two specifically,
Mhm.
along with staff to put something together for you.
Yeah, I think that kind of covers what I was going to ask or request, is if we could have some sort of info sheet or look at the numbers of, how many people are we serving? Where do the majority of those calls come from? Are there major concerns we're addressing? So that, I guess I want to know, obviously I have my own experience of years on the board and different interactions with EMS, but like what our stake is, and I guess in this.
So trustee Moran, if you would ever like to do that, we do get that regularly.
Okay.
I'm just saying it's public record. It's a little harder to find because they don't make their records as public, but if you want to see that, we can have that sent over too.
Okay, I guess that's great. And if there's certain, I guess, points that we should be taking into account as we go through this was my.
I would say, I think, Robert, we should work together to assemble that information. Another option is we could probably ask Director Russell to attend. I think that's a reasonable request. If every governing body is asked to think seriously about the agreement, to ask questions of him. So maybe we can talk, Robert, about whether that might work out on the 3rd.
Okay, he's been extremely helpful in this process. In fact, he's the one who converted the the typewritten agreement into Word. So, I mean, he has an interest in this as well. So I think he'd be more than happy to assist.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have him here. Yeah, Trisha.
I would imagine there's some other more recent agreements. I know the fire was mentioned, but other communities or other districts in Wisconsin that would be good to reference potentially.
There are plenty of examples out there. It is a wide span of models. This is not a cookie cutter, one size fits all scenario for us, but there are best practices that certainly we can do some research on.
And it's been changing in the last decade or so, how EMS is provided across communities. Other comments or questions for Robert? And Robert, thank you very much for tackling this and for taking this on. Yeah. None?
We'll proceed with that consensus thought then of the subgroup.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Robert. All right, next item on the list, discuss and take action on the purchase of an additional boardroom camera, page 147 of your packet. And that's Jared.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. So earlier this year, I believe in January, we rolled out our new audio video system here in the boardroom where we have the nice new larger laser projection screen and our two HD cameras mounted on the walls. It's a great system. It's super easy to use. I took 15 minutes earlier today and taught Gabe how to use it. And he's actually been running the cameras for the second half of this meeting tonight. Like it's that simple.
You want to introduce Gabe?
Yes, actually, you know what? I should probably introduce Gabe. So Gabe, it comes to us from Ripon University. He's an undergraduate there, entering senior year.
Yes.
Yep, he's going to be entering his senior year. He's from here in Waunakee. You are majoring in
Politics and government.
politics and government, has an interest in just learning more about municipal management. So he is interning with us for the summer. So he has been shadowing me here. When he's not, here during the day, he comes to the board meetings and watches me do the AV, and now he knows how to do it. So we currently have the two cameras, like I mentioned. One is up behind the gallery, which focuses almost exclusively on the village board dais. And the other camera is behind the dais, which focuses on one of three locations. Staff, as it is right now at this very moment, which is kind of weird as I see myself on the screen right in front of me. The podium and the screen, and the audience if necessary. We rarely use that one, but it is there. So we've gone through this now a few times, primarily for village board and plan commission. And there's just a couple of deficiencies that that I've noticed and we've noticed when we look back at the recordings. One of them is particularly as it relates to the amount that we have on that camera right now. And actually it happened a little bit earlier this meeting where if there's dialogue between like staff and whoever's at the podium, there can be this really awkward transition phase. It doesn't happen so much at the village board, but it happens a lot at the plan commission meetings because you'll have developers presenting an item and then there's going to be a lot of discourse between staff and the developer and the village attorney. And that camera takes about 5 seconds to pan between the two locations. And usually by the time it gets to the one person, they're done talking. And then we got to pan back to the other one. And it's just this very bizarre experience if you're a user. The other thing too, is that when it is focused on the podium at the angle it is, which is the best angle we have right now. There's a couple of things. One, you can see right into kind of our office space and like the building inspector's cube, and you can see cars going by in the windows in the back. It's kind of weird. The other thing is that you can't see the screen very well. So like earlier today, we had the presentation on the playground audit. That's fine because that was, Todd was sharing his screen. So on the presentation, both on Zoom and YouTube, you can see those just fine because it takes up the whole screen. But if that had just been a regular PowerPoint, anyone watching this on Zoom or YouTube would see the screen, but at a 45-degree angle, so it'd be very distorted. Right now, if we were to look at the podium, you could see that some sort of Word document with text is up there, but you couldn't read it. So I'd like to propose adding a third camera in here, which I'm envisioning would be basically placed right above our staff location here, which would have basically a straight shot at the podium and the screen. And in addition to that, we would have additional presets that we could set. So right now we have 4 presets that we just toggle between whenever a speaker is speaking. We would add some presets to also zoom in a little bit more on the board when you're talking, because right now we have one board preset which views all 7 of you, from trustee McPherson all the way over to trustee Fry. That works great when, you know, there's a whole discussion going on, but the problem is, you know, for minute taking or just the general public, unless you're particularly animated and talking with your hands, or we know what you sound like, but the public who's watching for the first time might not know what your voices sound like. You can't really tell who's talking, especially so when a screen is being shared and the full camera gets reduced to a little thumbnail on your screen. So we would add some presets that would zoom in more. I'm thinking, you know, like 3 trustees at a time, add 3 more presets. So like trustee McPherson to trustee Moran to trustee Kaufman to trustee Fry. Just zoom in a little bit more so you can actually get a better view of the speaker. In addition to the preset of having just frankly a better angle on the podium and the screen. So, and then getting rid of that lag time, because when we're switching feeds between cameras, it's like instantaneous as opposed to panning. So I think it'll just make for a much better viewing experience. You know, we've invested a lot in this system. And I just think this would make it that much better for the viewing public. So that's what I'm asking for. We have used ARPA monies for this system in the past. And that's what we'd be looking to do here as well.
All right, thank you, Jared. What questions do we have? Comments?
Not so much a question, but a comment. Having looked at additional prices for all this stuff, this is actually a very fair quote. So.
We're gonna be on the screen.
State contract pricing.
We're gonna be on the screen more. I gotta make sure I look good.
Yeah, 3 cameras. Now we're ready for a whole television production.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was excited to see this, and I was like, you don't want to watch a game and have the ball be on the other side of the field. So I'll move to approve. Oh, I lost it. I'll move to approve the agreement with AVI Systems.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion before we go to question? No, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, motion carries. I owe you all ice cream, one at a time, and we won't discuss it over social media. So for this long and very productive meeting, we got a lot done tonight. We have any other motions that anyone might want to make?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, any discussion of this one? No? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Meeting adjourns.